following video is intended for mature audiences. It contains horror elements, adult themes, and language that might not be suitable for younger viewers. The naughty list. I should have known better than to play Santa, but bills don't pay themselves and 3 months behind on rent has a way of making bad decisions look reasonable. That's what I told myself anyway. It was the same thing I'd said about the drinking, the gambling, every other mistake that led me to this moment. The Crossroads Mall was a madhouse on Christmas Eve, packed with last-minute shoppers clutching credit cards like lifelines. The place had seen better days. Most of the storefronts were empty now, their windows covered with brown paper and coming soon signs that had yellowed with age. 10 years ago, this was the crown jewel of downtown. Now, it was just another dying monument to better times, kept alive by nostalgia and the fact that the next nearest mall was 40 miles away. Tonight, the holiday decorations did a good job of covering up the building's wear and tear. Light strings bounced off the dirty floor tiles, illuminating the still air. Wall cracks were hidden under tinsel and garland, while big red bows concealed ceiling water stains. The broken fountain in the middle of the court was now a festive scene with moving reindeer and fake snow. I tugged at my fake beard, already sweating under the red suit. The polyester felt like it was suffocating me, and the padding made every movement a struggle. The entire outfit smelled of mothballs and desperation, with undertones of whoever had worn it for the morning shift. The beard itched, and the pillow strapped to my stomach had shifted sideways, giving me the appearance of a Santa who'd suffered a bizarre industrial accident. One more hour, then I could ditch this gig and hit O'Malley's. Maybe Sarah would be working tonight. She always gave me free drinks when Keith wasn't around to see. Said I reminded her of her brother. Another loser who couldn't get his life together, I imagined. But beggars can't be choosers, and the free whiskey helped quiet the voices, the memories. Next, called Amy, the teenage elf coordinator who seemed far too invested in her minimum wage job. She'd spent 20 minutes lecturing me about proper Santa protocol when I showed up late, nursing a hangover that made her voice feel like ice picks in my temples. "Remember to smile," she hissed as she passed. The last Santa got fired for making a kid cry. A little girl climbed onto my lap, all pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Her dress was immaculate, red velvet with white lace trim, the kind of outfit that screamed, "Daddy's credit card has no limit." Or used to anyway. Something about her seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it, like I'd glimpsed her face in a fever dream. "What's your name?" I asked, forcing cheer into my voice. The script was simple enough. Name, age, what do you want? Smile for the camera, next. Even I couldn't screw that up, or so I thought. "Emma," she said sweetly. "I'm 6. Her voice sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't say why. It was perfectly normal, the high-pitched tone of a young child, but something in it resonated wrongly, like a tuning fork struck at the wrong frequency. "And what do you want for Christmas, Emma?" She leaned close, her breath smelling of peppermint and something else, something metallic, like pennies, like blood. "I want you to suffer, Jack Williams, like my daddy did." I blinked, cold sweat suddenly soaking through my costume. "What?" Her eyes turned black, her pupil and iris swallowed by inky darkness. Not just dark, they were voids, windows into something that shouldn't exist. "You killed him, March 15th, corner of Pine and Madison. You were drunk again. He was just walking home from his second job, the one he took to buy me this dress." My blood ran cold, and the hit and run, the one I never reported, the dented fender I'd fixed in cash at Miguel's body shop. There had been nothing in the news. I thought he'd survived. I'd driven past the next day, but there was nothing. No police, no ambulance, just a broken umbrella in the gutter. "You left him there," Emma whispered, her small fingers digging into my arm with impossible strength. He took 2 hours to die, alone, in the rain, calling for help on a phone with a cracked screen, trying to reach Mom one last time, and now you sit here pretending to be something pure, something good, wearing a suit as red as the blood you washed off your car. Before I could react, she was gone, skipping back to a woman in a black dress. The woman turned, and for a moment, I saw through her face, like looking through a window into an empty room. Beyond her, through the mall's skylights, the sun seemed to dim, as if something vast had passed between it and the earth. I sat there, stunned, as the next kid was ushered forward. A boy, maybe 8, wearing a Christmas sweater with reindeer prancing across the front. The reindeer's eyes seemed to follow me, their embroidered hooves leaving bloody tracks across the wool. "I want a Nintendo Switch," he said, then leaned in close. His eyes held the same bottomless darkness as Emma's. "And I want to watch you burn. June 12th, the apartment fire on Oak Street. You dropped your cigarette on the couch after passing out. 3 people died, I was one of them." My hands began to shake. I didn't remember much from that night. The insurance had paid out enough to cover most of my gambling debts. I'd told myself no one was hurt, just smoke damage, maybe some lost belongings. The newspaper said differently, but I stopped reading after the first paragraph. Stopped watching the news when they showed the families crying. Drowned the guilt in bourbon until the memories blurred. The rest of my shift passed in a nightmare blur. Each child seemed wrong. They all knew. All whispered dates, times, sins I'd tried to forget. A litany of crimes stretching back years, each one accompanied by eyes that flickered to solid black when the parents weren't looking. Parents whose faces seemed to slip, revealing emptiness beneath. A girl with butterfly clips in her hair reminded me of the hit and run in Cincinnati, back when I was still driving truck routes. A boy in a Lakers jersey knew about the convenience store robbery that ended with the clerk having a heart attack. Twins in matching Christmas dresses spoke in unison about the insurance scam that burned down my uncle's warehouse, with inventory still inside, with the night watchman still inside. They knew everything, every dark secret, every crime I'd talked my way out of, every sin I'd buried under layers of alcohol and denial. And their parents weren't parents at all. Each time I looked up, I saw more of them. Standing at the edges of the Christmas display, watching with faces that weren't faces. The woman in the black dress moved among them, whispering, and wherever she passed, the reality seemed to thin. Finally, mercifully, my shift ended. I changed quickly, my trembling hands struggling with the buttons as I stuffed the Santa suit into my bag. It felt heavier than before, and something dark had seeped through the white fur trim, something that smelled like old pennies. The mall was closing, last call announcements echoing through nearly empty corridors. The voice on the PA system seemed distorted, words stretching and warping until they became meaningless sounds. The Christmas music playing softly through the speakers had changed too, minor key now, discordant like holiday songs played backward at half speed. I hurried toward the exit, keys clutched like brass knuckles between my fingers. Past the darkened storefronts, their windows now reflecting things that couldn't be there. Faces, bodies, crime scenes I'd walked away from. In the GameStop window, a TV display played security footage of accidents I'd caused. The mannequins in Macy's wore clothes from people I'd hurt, stained and torn in familiar patterns. The lights flickered, then went out. Darkness engulfed me, but not normal darkness. This was alive, hungry, pressing against my skin like cold fingers. Giggles, soft at first, then growing louder, coming from every direction. The sound of small feet on tile, circling, the click of dress shoes, the scuff of sneakers, the tap of patent leather Mary Janes. A whole congregation of children moving in the dark. I fumbled for my phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing more children. Dozens of them, surrounding me in a circle. Their eyes gleamed in the light, reflecting like animals. No, not reflecting, generating their own light, pinpricks of hellfire in the darkness. Each one a victim, a witness, a life I'd ruined or ended through carelessness or greed or simple human meanness. Ho ho ho, they chanted in unison, their voices a discordant chorus that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Here comes Santa Claus. I recognized them all now. The teenage boy I'd sold bad pills to at a concert, his nose still bleeding from his final seizure. The old woman I'd scammed out of her pension, her neck bent at the angle it took when she'd hung herself. The homeless man I'd kicked out of my building's doorway on the coldest night of the year, his fingers and toes still black with frostbite. All wearing children's bodies like ill-fitting suits, their true faces shimmering beneath the surface like fish under the ice. "Stay back," I croaked, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny." They advanced, their small hands reaching for me. Hands that weren't hands at all, but twisted things of bone and shadow. Fingers too long, too jointed, tipped with something darker than the nail. I turned to run, but my foot caught on something, a candy cane that moved like a snake, its stripes writhing as it wrapped around my ankle. I went down hard, my phone skittering across the floor. The screen cracked, the light flickering wildly, casting jumping shadows on the walls. In the stuttering illumination, I saw the children's true forms. Hollow things, puppet bodies piloted by spirits of vengeance and judgment. Tiny fingers grabbed at my clothes, my hair. Each touch burned like dry ice, leaving blisters in the shape of accusations. Murderer, thief, liar. I thrashed, attempting to shake them off, but there were too many. They dragged me down, their combined weight pinning me to the cold tile. The floor beneath me seemed to soften, to give way as if I were sinking into a grave. Emma appeared, looming over me. In her hand, she held a candy cane. Its end had been sharpened to a wicked point, striped red and white like arterial spray on bone. Her dress was wet now, soaked through with rain from that March night. Water dripped from her pigtails, but where it hit my face, it burned like acid. "You've been lying to children for years," she said, her voice a guttural growl that echoed with her father's last breaths, the sound of ragged breathing, of lungs filling with rain. "Selling false hope, empty promises, just like you lied to the police, to the insurance companies, to yourself. Did you know Daddy was still alive when you drove away, still calling for help? He saw your license plate, you know, tried to tell the 911 operator, but you were already changing it by then, weren't you?" The other children took up the chant. Liar, fraud, naughty. Their faces flickered between youth and death, innocence and accusation. Each one bore the marks of their endings, the bruises, the burns, the broken bones I'd given them. "Please," I gasped, tasting blood and peppermint. "I'm sorry. I'll do anything. I'll confess. Turn myself in." Emma smiled, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Behind her, I saw the woman in the black dress approaching. Her face was gone now, replaced by a void that hurt my eyes to look at. In that emptiness, I saw flashes of what awaited me, an eternity of endings, of last moments played out again and again. "Oh, Jack," Emma said, her voice harmonizing with a dozen others. The voice of her father, of all fathers, of judgment itself. "You'll do everything, but first you'll suffer, like they suffered, like we all suffered. And then you'll take his place wearing the red suit forever, bringing gifts of justice to all the other monsters who think they've gotten away with it." The candy cane plunged downward. Pain exploded in my chest as peppermint and copper filled my mouth. Each child came forward, their own candy weapons raised. Death by 1,000 Christmas cuts. The children began to sing, their voices carrying the weight of eternal judgment. "You better watch out, you better not cry, you better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is hunting you down." As darkness closed in, I heard sleigh bells, a deep, booming laugh that shook the very foundations of the mall. The sound of hooves on the roof, of ancient things coming to collect their due. Through the skylights, I saw a sleigh silhouetted against the moon, pulled by things that were definitely not reindeer. "Ho, ho, ho," it said, its voice the sound of avalanches and winter storms. "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." The children's laughter was the last thing I heard. Their small hands ripped and peeled me apart. Each touch was a memory of the pain I'd caused, each giggle a scream I'd ignored. And somewhere in a cemetery across town, fresh snow began to fall on a row of small gravestones. Emma Sullivan, 2016 to 2022, beloved daughter, may justice find those who walk free. Michael Chandler, 2014 to 2022, forever 8. Justice comes to all. Nina Martin, 2015 to 2022. Angels watch over us. Even Santa must pay for his sins. The mall opens as usual on the day after Christmas. There's a "Help Wanted" sign in the window of the Santa display. The suit is clean, though some say the white fur trim is stained with something that won't wash out. The position has a high turnover rate, but the children keep coming. And somewhere in the night, a sleigh flies on. Its driver wears a familiar face, stretched tight over something ancient and cold. The bells jingle with every soul collected. Christmas comes but once a year. Justice is eternal. The Haunted Ornament. Nestled in a picturesque town of snow-covered pines and quaint cottages, stood an ancient manor steeped in mystery. The Harrington Estate, with its walls adorned in ivy and towering oak doors, bore witness to generations past. But hidden within its halls was a sinister secret, one that lurked within the forgotten recesses of the attic, a relic with a cursed origin: the Haunted Ornament. Whispers of this artifact echoed through the town like a spectral heirloom, passed down through generations in hushed tones. Its malevolent aura was rumored to ensnare unsuspecting souls within its delicate glass confines. While many dismissed it as folklore, the Layton family soon learned the truth upon moving into the estate. Drawn to the mysteries held within the dusty corners of the attic, the Laytons uncovered the ornament amidst cobweb-laden trunks and moth-eaten tapestries. Its delicate surface, etched with intricate designs, seemed to writhe under even the faintest light. Oblivious to its dark history, they hung it proudly upon their Christmas tree, unaware of the terror it would unleash. As they decorated their tree with baubles and tinsel, an eerie chill settled over the manor. Faint whispers echoed through the halls, growing louder with each passing night. Shadows danced wickedly in the flickering candlelight, and unseen hands rattled doorknobs, sending shivers down their spines. The allure of the ornament masked the impending horror that awaited them, its presence a foreboding omen of doom, lurking just beneath its delicate facade. As the nights grew colder, so did the atmosphere within the Harrington estate. The Layton family could not shake the feeling of being watched, of something unseen lurking in the shadows. Strange occurrences plagued them at every turn, from objects moving on their own to unexplained footsteps echoing through the halls in the dead of night. Every time they looked at the haunted ornament, they could feel the malevolent energy radiating off of it, like a toxic cloud. They began to experience vivid nightmares, night terrors filled with grotesque visions of decaying corpses and writhing serpents. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred, and soon it became hard to tell which was which. They started to see apparitions lurking in their peripheral vision, fleeting glimpses of twisted faces and unnatural movements. The Laytons knew that they had to get rid of the ornament, but every attempt they made to remove it from their home was met with resistance. The ornament seemed to possess a will of its own, and it was determined to stay with them no matter what. It had become an unwelcome presence in their lives, one that they couldn't escape from. Days turned into weeks, and the Laytons slowly began to lose their grip on reality. They were consumed by the ornament's malevolent energy, unable to think or act rationally. The whispers grew louder, taunting them with promises of death and destruction. The shadows became more solid, taking on twisted forms that defied comprehension. And then one night, as they huddled together in fear, the ornament began to glow. The delicate surface crackled with dark power, and the room was filled with an otherworldly light. The Laytons screamed as the ornament burst apart, unleashing a horde of writhing serpents that slithered towards them with malicious intent. The Harrington estate was consumed by the sounds of blood-curdling screams and the slithering hisses of snakes, creating a cacophony of terror that echoed through its halls. As the nightmare reached its climax, the once proud Layton family lay reduced to a mere pile of bones. But the true source of this horror was not gone, for the haunted ornament still pulsed with dark energy, its evil now amplified by the destruction it had caused. It lay dormant in the midst of the carnage, a silent killer waiting for its next unsuspecting victim to cross its path. Over the years, the Harrington estate became a desolate and forsaken place, left to rot and decay under the watchful eye of the Cursed Ornament. Yet even in its abandonment, the evil presence lingered, biding its time until new prey stumbled upon its cursed existence. And so it was that over time, the Harrington estate became known as one of the most haunted places in the world. Local legends spoke of the restless souls that still screamed in agony within its walls, their tortured existence forever tied to the power of the Haunted Ornament. Many brave souls attempted to uncover the mystery behind the horrific events that transpired at the estate, but none ever returned. It was as though they had been consumed by the malevolent force lurking within, leaving nothing but their bones behind as a grim warning to others. And so, to this day, the legend of the Haunted Ornament lives on as a cautionary tale of what lurks in the shadows, a reminder that even seemingly innocent objects can hold unimaginable power and unleash unspeakable horrors upon those foolish enough to challenge them. The gift of teeth. With eager squeals, the children tore open their presents, their eyes sparkling with anticipation. But as they reveled in their new toys and treats, Sarah couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. Her eyes kept darting towards the plain wooden box nestled beneath the Christmas tree, its lid inscribed with ominous words, "For the deserving child." With trembling hands, she opened the box, and inside, on a bed of deep red velvet, lay a single pristine tooth. A whisper echoed in her mind, promising power and vengeance against those who had wronged her. That night, she dreamt of teeth, rows upon rows of them taunting her with promises of control. But as days passed and the tooth's whispers grew stronger, Sarah couldn't resist its lure. She used its unnatural power to seek revenge on those who had hurt her, watching with satisfaction as they cowered before her. But with each act of cruelty, the tooth seemed to grow, its power consuming Sarah until she no longer recognized herself in the mirror. The once innocent little girl was now a twisted creature, with rows of razor-sharp teeth jutting from her mouth. Desperate for a way out, Sarah sought help from an old woman rumored to possess ancient wisdom. The crone looked into Sarah's eyes and saw the darkness that had taken hold of her. "Child," she rasped, "the tooth is not a gift but a curse. It feasts on your anger and pain, twisting you into its puppet." Just then, the tooth pulsed with a malevolent light, its grip tightening around Sarah's soul. Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes, her hands clutching the crone's gnarled fingers. "Can I really be saved?" The crone's smile was grim, her black cloak draped over a crooked staff. "Only if you are willing to face your darkness," she said, her voice raspy like the sound of dried leaves rustling in the wind. "Extract a tooth, an offering for the one you have wronged the most." Sarah's heart raced as she understood the price of redemption. She had to confront her past actions, admit her cruelty, and seek forgiveness from her victims. The thought of it was a crushing weight on her chest, but she knew it was her only chance at salvation. With shaking hands, Sarah dug her fingers into the back of her mouth and yanked out a bloody tooth. She approached the crone who sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, the flickering fire casting eerie shadows on her wrinkled face. The tooth glinted in the dim light as Sarah held it out to the crone, tears streaming down her face. She confessed all of her sins and begged for forgiveness, hoping for a cure to the curse that plagued her. As the crone accepted the tooth, a blinding light burst forth from it, dissolving it into dust. Sarah felt a surge of icy pain shoot through her body, but then it faded away, leaving behind a sense of peace and clarity. She glanced at her reflection in a mirror, seeing the monstrous teeth that had once filled her mouth were now gone. In their place were normal human teeth. The crone nodded approvingly, her lips curving into a ghost of a smile. "You have chosen the path of light," she said. "Remember, child, that darkness may always whisper to you, but the power to resist it lies within you." Sarah left the crone's hut as the first rays of dawn painted the sky pink and gold, well aware that the whispers of darkness would always linger. But she now knew that she had the choice to follow the path toward light, resisting the shadows in her own heart. The gift of teeth was a terror that Sarah could never escape, a constant reminder of the pain and suffering she'd both caused and endured. but it also served as a powerful lesson, etched into her being like a scar, teaching her the true strength of forgiveness and self-control. It was a chapter stained with darkness and blood, but one that ultimately led to a triumphant rebirth, paving the way for a brilliant future. Eternity, nestled in the depths of Raven's Valley, shrouded by a perpetual veil of mist, lay the abandoned Blackwood Station. Local legend spoke of a ghostly train that appeared only at midnight, carrying souls to damnation. I'd dismissed these stories as folklore until I found Annie's journal, its final entry dated the night she vanished. I've found it, the gateway they spoke of, the train calls to those who've touched death and survived. Tonight, I'll finally understand why we lived when others died. 5 years ago, we'd survived the crash that killed our parents. The SUV hydroplaned on the rain-slicked mountain road, crashing through the guardrail. As we plunged toward the ravine below, Annie grabbed my hand. For 3 endless seconds, we hung suspended between life and death. Then rescue workers pulled us out. Mom and Dad weren't so lucky. Annie never accepted it was just chance that spared us. She became obsessed with near-death experiences, with bridges between worlds. She spent countless hours in libraries and online forums, connecting with others who'd brushed against death's fingers and lived. I'd written off her research as grief-driven madness until I found her carefully documented evidence. Disappearances spanning centuries, all linked to the old railway line. All were survivors of deadly accidents seemingly drawn to the tracks like moths to flame. The station appeared frozen in time, its Victorian architecture untouched by decay. The air felt thick and electric, and the scent of ozone mixed with something sweeter, more cloying, like flowers left too long on a grave. As midnight approached, I heard it, a whistle that bore through my skull like an ice pick. The sound resonated with something inside me, awakening memories of the crash, screeching metal, shattering glass, Annie's hand gripping mine as we dangled above the abyss. At that moment between impact and rescue, I'd seen something, a darkness deeper than night and filled with watching eyes. The train emerged from the fog like a nightmare taking form. Its black metal surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a void in the shape of a locomotive. Steam hissed from its stack, but something was wrong. The train moved against gravity and the windows pulsed with a sickly green luminescence that revealed the flickering shadows of passengers with movements too fluid to be human. What the hell? An unseen force pulled me toward the nearest car. The door opened with a hiss of stale air, revealing an interior that defied physical space. The carriage stretched impossibly long, its walls rippling like heat waves over summer asphalt. Plush velvet seats lined both sides, each occupied by a figure that seemed more suggestion than substance. As I moved down the aisle, the passengers turned to face me. Their features were blurred as if viewed through frosted glass, but I recognized the hollow-eyed look of trauma survivors. Each had cheated death, and death had followed them here. A woman in dated clothing clutched a newspaper reporting the Eastland disaster, water still dripping from her 1915 dress. A man in military fatigues bore dog tags from Vietnam, shrapnel wounds weeping shadows instead of blood. A child in singed pajamas hugged a teddy bear, smoke still rising from its fur. Their eyes bore into me, filled with a hunger that mirrored my desperate desire for answers. The train lurched forward, reality distorting around us as we left normal space behind. Through windows that no longer reflected the outside world, I glimpsed impossible landscapes. Cities built from bone and sinew, oceans of liquid darkness, skies peppered with watching eyes. Your sister understood. A voice came from everywhere and nowhere. She sought power over death itself. We offered her transformation instead. A figure materialized in the seat across from me. It wore Annie's face like an ill-fitting mask, her features stretched too wide over something ancient and unexplainable. But her eyes, they were still her eyes, green as summer leaves, filled with the manic gleam I remembered from her final months. "Death isn't an end," she said, her voice harmonizing with others. "It's a door. Those who survive its touch carry a key. We've waited centuries for enough keys to turn the lock. to break down the barrier between life and death itself. The other passengers rose in unison, their forms melting and blending like wax. Annie, or the thing wearing her face, reached for me with hands that elongated into shadowy tendrils. Her skin rippled, revealing glimpses of what she'd become, something vast and dark and hungry. "Join us, brother. Help us break the barrier between life and death. No one else will have to lose their family. No one will ever have to say goodbye." I appreciated the logic that had drawn her in, the promise of ending death's tyranny, of reuniting sundered families. But in her eyes, I saw the price. Humanity traded for power, love corrupted by obsession. The thing she'd become wasn't my sister anymore, just as the shadows wearing our parents' faces in her memories weren't them. "That's not what they'd want," I said, thinking of family dinners, of Dad's terrible jokes, of Mom's garden, of Annie's laugh before grief hollowed her out. "That's not what you want." Her face contorted, the features sliding like oil on water. "Then why did you come?" "To bring you home," I answered simply. I pulled out the old photo I'd carried since the crash. Our family at the lake, all of us laughing. Annie taught me to skip stones, and Mom and Dad watched from the dock. Her form flickered at the sight, something human bleeding through her transformed state. The train let out a piercing screech, its metal frame contorting as the fabric of reality rippled against itself. The other passengers lunged forward, their combined mass threatening to drown us in supernatural flesh. But Annie moved faster, shoving me toward the door. "Run!" Her voice was her own again, just for a moment. The voice that had sung me to sleep after nightmares, that had promised everything would be okay after the crash. "I chose this, but you can choose differently. Live, brother. Live for both of us." The door burst open and I fell, tumbling through gaps and voids. I hit the station platform hard, concrete cracking beneath me. When I glanced up, the train was already fading, Annie's face watching from a window that rippled like disturbed water. "I love you," she mouthed, just before the train vanished into mist that rapidly dissipated, leaving behind only the scent of summer flowers and engine grease. I found myself alone on the platform, clutching the family photo. But something had changed. In the image, Annie's eyes now held a faint, ghostly glow, a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never fully close. The station still stands, its platform waiting in eternal midnight. Sometimes I hear the whistle, calling to those marked by death's near miss. But I don't answer. Some prices are too high, even for answers, even for love. Annie's journal sits in my desk drawer. On nights when the whistle echoes across Raven's Valley, its pages glow with the same sickly light I saw in the train's windows. Inside, her final entry has changed, continuing beyond what she wrote. The train offers power over death, but death isn't meant to be conquered. It's meant to give life meaning. Choose life, dear brother. Choose it every day. That's the only way to truly cheat death, to live so fully it can never truly win. I've pasted warning signs around the old station, though most ignore them. To ordinary eyes, it's just another abandoned relic of a bygone era. But survivors know better. We recognize each other by the haunted look in our eyes, the invisible scars left by death's near embrace. When I meet them, I share Annie's last message. Some listen, others don't. The train calls to them anyway, offering power, transformation, and reunion with lost loved ones. On quiet nights, I sometimes catch glimpses of the train through my window, running on tracks that no longer exist. In its windows, faces press against the glass. Passengers who chose power over humanity, transformation over acceptance. Annie is among them, part of something boundless and terrible and eternal. Sometimes she waves, and for a moment I see my sister again, before the thing she's become bleeds through. But in the photo on my wall, she's still just my sister, laughing at the lake on a perfect summer day. That's how I choose to remember her. That's how I choose to live. Some doors should stay closed. Death may be a bitter companion, but it's what makes us human, what makes life precious, what makes love worth the pain of loss. The whistle calls again, distant but growing closer. Tonight, somewhere, Another survivor will face their choice. Another soul will stand on that platform, tempted by promises of power over death itself. I pray they choose life, choose their humanity, choose the bittersweet gift of mortality that makes every moment matter. My sister chose differently, but her final gift was showing me why I shouldn't follow. Gingerbread Dreams. In the quaint village of Frostfall, nestled amidst towering pines blanketed in snow, lived Millie. She was known as the Baker, with hands that shimmered with magic and a heart woven from cinnamon and dreams. Her gingerbread men were legendary, their button eyes and sugar-crusted smiles bringing joy to every Yuletide celebration. But this year, something had changed. Inspired by an ancient recipe found in a crumbling cookbook, Millie crafted a single, magnificent gingerbread man. He stood taller than any child, his features carved with an unsettling precision. 2 obsidian chips served as his eyes, glistening with an otherworldly sheen. This was no ordinary treat. It was a masterpiece, a living embodiment of Yuletide glee. However, beneath the sweet gingerbread glaze, something sinister stirred. The ancient recipe, whispered from long-forgotten tongues, had infused the dough with a dark magic, a hunger for something far more chilling than sugar. The gingerbread man, aptly named Frostbite, was not a friend, but a predator in disguise. On Christmas Eve, the first taste of his evil became evident. As Millie presented Frostbite to the eager village children, a chilling whisper slithered through the air. The gingerbread man's grating and raspy voice spoke of forbidden desires and secrets buried beneath the snow. Fear gripped the children as the laughter died in their throats. Oblivious to the darkness she had baked into her creation, Millie dismissed the strange occurrence as mere overactive imagination. But that night, her innocence met its demise as she dreamt of Frostbite. His smile twisted into a grotesque rictus, and his eyes burning with unholy fire. He spoke of a ritual, a sacrifice under the blood moon that would grant him eternal life and plunge Frostfall into an icy abyss. Sweat drenched Millie's forehead as she jolted awake from the nightmare. She tried to calm her racing heart, but a prickle of fear remained, thanks in part to Frostbite, whose obsidian eyes never wavered from her and seemed to hold a malevolent glint. "Tonight, Baker," Frostbite said, "prepare the offering." Panic seized Millie as she realized she had to stop Frostbite. But how? His flesh was made of gingerbread and impervious to ordinary blades. Desperate for a solution, she frantically searched the ancient recipe book passed down through generations. And there it was, a counterspell infused with peppermint and moonlight. As the blood moon rose, casting an eerie crimson glow on the snow, Millie prepared for battle. Fear threatened to choke her, but the thought of losing her village to Frostbite's wrath fueled a fire within her. She chanted the peppermint verse, her voice trembling yet resolute. Frostbite sensed his doom and lunged at Millie with all his might. She ducked, narrowly avoiding his gingerbread fist, as it smashed through the countertop instead. As Frostbite stepped onto the balcony bathed in moonlight, the peppermint spell took effect. His gingerbread skin crackled and flaked away, revealing a grotesque, pulsating mass beneath. With a piercing shriek that cut through the stillness of the night, Frostbite convulsed and melted into a black, viscous ooze before dissipating completely into the snow. The only sound left was a chilling silence that followed. As dawn broke, washing away the remnants of the nightmare, Frostfall awoke to an uneasy sense of peace. The memory of Frostbite will always linger, but it has become a chilling Yuletide tale. And Millie, forever scarred by the experience, continued her baking, creating treats that were now a touch less sweet and a touch more cautious. As the heavy snow fell outside, Millie sat in her cozy kitchen, surrounded by the comforting warmth of her oven and the sweet scent of freshly baked gingerbread. She hummed along to Christmas carols as she carefully shaped and decorated each cookie, lost in peaceful contentment. But as the night wore on and the winds grew stronger, a faint whisper crept through the cracks in her walls. It was a grating voice, chilling and unsettling, hinting at dark desires and gingerbread nightmares. A shiver ran down Millie's spine as she continued her work, attempting to push away the eerie feeling. Every year on Christmas Eve, Millie lights a peppermint candle, its invigorating scent filling the room and reminding her of the danger that lurks in the shadows. She never forgot the story of the gingerbread man, a cautionary tale passed down through generations in Frostfall. It served as a reminder that even the sweetest things could harbor darkness, and that magic could easily turn into something sinister. No matter how many times Millie bakes her gingerbread cookies with love and sincerity, she never forgets the unease that settled in her heart. The snow-kissed village of Frostfall held a dark secret, one that lingered in the air like a dense fog. As she kneaded the dough, she could almost hear the haunting laughter of the gingerbread man, his fiery eyes warning her to never let her guard down during Yuletide or risk falling victim to his twisted game. And so, with each batch of cookies, Millie vows to keep the darkness at bay, using every ounce of her willpower to resist its seductive lure. Nutcracker Nightmare. Hidden away in the abandoned attic of Carrion Keep, surrounded by dusty trinkets and peeling wallpaper, stood a lone nutcracker. Its ebony wood was worn and cracked, and its once painted smile had faded into a sinister leer. This was no ordinary toy, but a cursed object bound to the mansion, waiting to be unleashed upon the unsuspecting world. Amelia, a curious young woman invited to Carrion Keep for her eccentric uncle's annual Christmas gathering, felt an inexplicable urge to explore the attic. As she climbed the creaky stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. And there it was, on a dusty shelf in the corner, the Nutcracker, its cold eyes fixed on her. Ignoring a shiver of unease, Amelia reached out to touch it. As soon as her fingers grazed its smooth surface, a loud crack reverberated through the room and the floorboards gave way beneath her. She tumbled into darkness, terror gripping her as she fell towards an unknown destination. Amelia hung precariously on the edge of a hidden trapdoor, her heart racing as she looked down at the dark abyss below. And then she felt it, a cold hand wrapped around her wrist, pulling her back from the brink. It was the Nutcracker. In a slithering voice, it whispered, "I saved you, girl. Now you must save me." Confused but desperate for answers, Amelia agreed to help. She followed the Nutcracker's cryptic instructions deep into the bowels of the mansion, navigating mysterious corridors. As she delved deeper into the heart of Carrion Keep, Amelia realized that this wasn't just a holiday retreat. It was a place of dark magic and ancient pacts, a mausoleum of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Maybe she was the key to unlocking them all. Their journey through the dark, twisting tunnels finally led to a hidden chamber. Amelia's flashlight revealed a macabre scene, skulls arranged in a circle, candles casting flickering shadows on the walls. Her pulse quickened at the sight of the Nutcracker teetering on the rim of the ceremonial circle, its carved limbs tapping a sinister beat. Its voice hissed through clenched teeth, promising to grant her deepest desire if she released it from its prison. Amelia's mind clouded with longing for a childhood wish that had never been fulfilled. She chanted the ancient words taught to her by the Nutcracker, her desperation overpowering any sense of reason. The air crackled with electricity, and the walls groaned in protest as the Nutcracker pulsed with an unholy light. The wooden fiend then shattered into 1,000 dark feathers. Emerging from the debris was a tall figure with burning eyes and a chilling smile. Krampus, the Lord of Shadows, was somehow free from his wooden tomb. Krampus leaned in closer to Amelia, his inhumanly wide smile revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs. "You wished for a family Christmas, did you not?" he rasped. With a sickening realization, Amelia understood that her wish had been granted by the Lord of Shadows himself. With a snap of his staff, Carrion Keep trembled and transformed. The once festive decorations twisted and warped into cages made of thorny vines, trapping Amelia and the other guests. Their joyful laughter turned to terrified screams as they too evolved into aberrant creatures, destined to be Krampus's playthings for eternity. Amelia, trapped in her own twisted desires, could only watch in horror as the mansion morphed into a macabre Christmas spectacle, the atmosphere filled with the echoes of Krampus's laughter and the cries of his damned guests. The once charming Nutcracker lay in shattered fragments, a grim reminder of the true horrors that lurked in the shadows. Its broken pieces served as a chilling warning that even the most innocent of objects can harbor sinister intentions. As Krampus's chaotic Christmas celebration raged on, Amelia stood alone amidst the chaos, transformed into a living nightmare by secrets unearthed and wishes granted by a malevolent force. The mere sight of her a reminder of the dangers involved in exploring the unknown depths. Krampus's Shadow. The snow fell in heavy clumps, coating the ground and muffling any sound. Little Timmy's small body trembled with fear as he cowered beneath the bed, his breaths coming in panicked gasps. The figure in red loomed over him, his once jolly face now twisted into a snarling mask of fury. His white beard hung in matted chunks, dripping icicles that glistened in the dim light. It was Krampus, the terrifying creature that brought punishment to those on the naughty list. Timmy had always thought he was just a myth, but here he was, looming menacingly over him. And it was all because of one lie whispered in anger in a moment of frustration. As Krampus approached, his heavy footsteps echoing on the floor, Timmy's heart raced with terror. The wind howled outside, masking the screams that escaped from the child's trembling lips. But Krampus heard them all too well, and his evil eyes fixed hungrily on the child. Just as Timmy thought it couldn't get any worse, the bedroom door burst open, and his parents stumbled in, their faces etched with terror. But Krampus only turned towards them with a cruel smile on his twisted face. With a flick of his hand, he unleashed an icy blast that froze Timmy's parents in place, their bodies unmoving statues of pure terror. Timmy could only watch as they stood helplessly at Krampus's feet, trapped in frozen blocks of ice. But just when all seemed lost, a blinding light erupted from the fireplace, casting fiery shadows across the room. In a flash, St. Nicholas appeared, tall and regal, with a long white beard braided with strands of gold. He wore shining armor that glinted in the candlelight and carried a staff crackling with electricity. Without hesitation, St. Nicholas engaged in a fierce battle against Krampus, unleashing bursts of fire from his staff as they clashed in the middle of the room. Timmy's screams echoed through the chaos as he watched the two powerful beings go head-to-head, fighting for his fate. Timmy stood in awe and watched St. Nicholas battle against evil, his movements a blur of swift, precise strikes, each one accompanied by a burst of radiant energy. With one final roar, St. Nicholas unleashed a powerful wave that shattered the icy prison, holding Timmy's terrified parents captive. The cold grip of fear released them, and they stumbled out of their daze. Krampus recoiled and slithered away into the shadows, defeated at last. As the dust settled and the chaos subsided, St. Nicholas turned to Timmy with a fierce yet compassionate expression. "Never forget," he thundered, "that even those we hold dear can be corrupted by evil. Keep your heart pure and your light shining bright." And just as quickly as he had appeared, St. Nicholas disappeared in a blaze of flames, leaving behind only the memory of his epic battle against darkness on that fateful Christmas night. Timmy couldn't help but feel grateful and inspired by the bravery and strength demonstrated by the legendary figure before him, and he knew that he would never lie again. The last carol. Frost crept across my office window as I translated the final page of my mother's grimoire. 25 years of running, and here I sat in Clausville again. My research grant a convenient excuse to investigate the Christmas murders. Papers plastered my walls, police reports, newspaper clippings, church records dating back to 1847. All were pointing to a pattern I'd witnessed firsthand as a child. My fingers traced the grimoire's worn leather binding, feeling the protective runes my ancestors had carved into its spine. The book had survived centuries of horror, passed down through generations of those who kept watch against things that hungered in the dark. They came from my father first. I watched from the stairs, 7 years old, clutching my stuffed reindeer as the carolers circled him. Their voices pierced the December air like icicles, a perfect harmony that made reality shiver. Mrs. Winters, my Sunday school teacher, led them in her Victorian dress, her smile stretched too wide as they sang, God rest you merry gentlemen, in frequencies that cracked our windows and made blood trickle from my nose. The other carolers I recognized too, Mr. Peterson from the post office, Ms. Clark who taught piano, and Dr. Hammond who treated my winter colds. All wore period costumes that seemed to shift and flow in the candlelight, their faces masks of festive joy that disguised an unimaginable evil. Dad knew what they were. A folklorist specializing in winter rituals, he'd spent years researching Clausville's dark history. He'd discovered the town's true founding, not by pious settlers seeking religious freedom, but cultists who'd fled Europe after bargaining with something ancient and vast. Something that hungered for human voices and had followed them across the ocean, drawn by their songs of devotion. The entity they worshipped was older than Christmas itself, a thing that had worn many names throughout history. The winter singer, the voice thief, the choir master. Each Christmas Eve, it demanded a sacrifice wrapped in carols and candy canes, sealed with innocent blood. His research journals, which I'd studied obsessively since returning, told the story. In 1847, a group of European cultists arrived in America, claiming to be seeking religious freedom. They founded Clausville in a valley where the winter winds made strange music through the trees. Their leader, Edward Winters, had promised them protection from the harsh New World in exchange for their devotion to an ancient power. They built their church with unusual acoustic properties, its architecture designed to amplify and channel certain frequencies. The town prospered, protected from harsh winters and disease, but each Christmas Eve, someone would vanish. Their disappearances were always accompanied by beautiful singing. "Your turn to join the choir, Thomas," they sang. Dad fought as they surrounded him. His academic theories proved horrifyingly real. They held him down, their fingers elongated into pale, bony restraints. Mrs. Winters, Edward's own descendant, pressed a sprig of poisoned holly between his lips, her own mouth opening far wider than human anatomy should allow. Every voice lifts the song. Every song feeds the choir. The choir must grow. What emerged from his throat wasn't human. Mom covered my eyes, but the sounds, wet, ripping, triumphant, haunted my nightmares for decades. When the police arrived, they found only scattered sheet music written in symbols that hurt to look at, and dark stains that tests would later show contained crystallized vocal cord tissue. The official report cited animal attack, the same explanation given for every Christmas Eve death in Clausville's history. Mom protected us with old magic passed down through generations. Her family had always known about things like this. They were grimoire keepers, magical archivists who documented supernatural threats and the means to combat them. Our home became a fortress, words carved into door frames using chisels blessed by 13 different faiths, crosses woven from pine needles soaked in holy water collected from churches across Europe, circles of salt around our beds mixed with crushed iron and graveyard dirt. She taught me our family's true heritage and about the power in our blood. For 18 years, we survived the carolers' attempts to claim us, moving from town to town, never staying long enough for them to track us. The grimoire taught me about our family's role. We weren't just record keepers. We were guardians against ancient powers that fed on humanity's voice, creativity, and song. Our bloodline carried a unique resonance, a magical frequency that could disrupt supernatural harmonies. This made us both valuable and dangerous to things like the entity that ruled Clausville. They needed our voices to complete their chorus, but our power could also dismantle them if wielded correctly. Then Mom's voice began to fail. "Cancer," the doctor said, but they couldn't explain the frost patterns that formed in her throat during examinations, or why her screams during chemotherapy harmonized perfectly with distant church bells. Their instruments showed crystalline growths where tumors should be, structures that seemed to vibrate with impossible frequencies. Her final letter told another truth. "The song is killing me from inside. I've held them off, but they're learning the true carol, the complete version of their master's song. If they finish it, the barrier between worlds will shatter. You're the last one who can stop them. Come home. The grimoire will show you how." I returned too late. I found her body surrounded by holly branches, her throat bulging with something still trying to claw its way out. Her grimoire lay open beside her, its pages containing generations of warnings and one final spell written in her blood. In death, her face held an expression of fierce triumph. She'd taken something vital from them with her last breath, corrupted a keynote in their true carol. Without it, they couldn't complete their song. But they had gained something too, knowledge of how to break our family's protections. The carolers were getting stronger. Each victim's voice added to their chorus, strengthening the entity they served. My research revealed more victims than I'd imagined. Children vanishing during Christmas pageants were found weeks later with their vocal cords missing and strange symbols carved into their frozen tongues. Choir members were discovered in practice rooms, their throats crystallized into delicate sculptures that hummed in frequencies that drove listeners mad. Whole families went silent overnight, their homes filled with frost patterns that formed musical notes in ancient languages. The patterns spread beyond Clausville, reports of similar incidents across the country, carol groups that sang too beautifully, Christmas concerts that left audiences changed. The entity's hunger was growing, and its servants were learning to spread their influence through modern means. Viral Christmas videos, popular carol arrangements that contained hidden frequencies, and choir competitions that served as hunting grounds. Tonight was Christmas Eve. I'd prepared Mom's study according to her final instructions. Protective circles drawn in blessed ink, harvested from sacred texts, windows lined with iron filings from church bells, and surveillance cameras modified to capture supernatural frequencies. The grimoire's countersong required a sacrifice. My blood, my voice, my connection to our family's power. But Mom's final notes revealed a twist. The spell could turn the entity's hunger back on itself, using the stolen voices as a weapon. The first carol drifted through my window at midnight. Silent night, twisted into geometries that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Through frost-glazed glass, I watched them approach. Dozens of carolers in period dress, candles casting shadows that moved independently of their flames. Mrs. Winters hadn't aged a day in 25 years, though the skin around her too wide smile looked stretched to breaking. Behind her came others, faces I recognized from missing person reports, bodies animated by stolen voices. "Welcome home, little grimoire," they sang. "We've saved you a place in the chorus. Your mother tried so hard to protect you, but her voice rings so sweetly in our choir now. Listen, can you hear her solo?" Their voices harmonized in patterns that distorted space, weaving the true carol note by note. Reality rippled around them like heat waves as the barrier between worlds thinned. Behind their human masks, something else gazed hungrily through their eyes, something vast and cold and endlessly hungry. The entity they served was almost here, drawn by their song like a spider feeling web vibrations. I opened Mom's grimoire to her final spell and began to sing. Power surged through the wards, making the old protections blaze like magnesium flares. The carolers' song rose to a glass-shattering pitch as their true forms emerged. Throats distending, jaws unhinging to reveal nests of crystalline vocal cords that caught and reflected candlelight in nauseating patterns. Their bodies twisted into impossible shapes as the entity's influence manifested fully. Mrs. Winters burst through my door in a shower of splintered wood and broken wards, her face stretched into impossible angles, skin splitting to reveal the crystalline structure beneath. Where her heart should have been, a cluster of frozen vocal cords pulsed with stolen songs. "Your bloodline ends tonight. The true carol must be completed." "Wrong note," I snarled and sang the countersong's final verse. The spell ripped through their chorus like a razor through silk, carrying my mother's corrupted note into their perfect harmony. Their bodies convulsed as the stolen voices fought to escape. The entity emerged, a writhing mass of frozen sound and hungry frequencies, beautiful and terrible in its partially manifested form. It attempted to possess me, to add my voice to its collection. I let it in, felt it freeze my blood and crystallize my throat. Then I changed the key. The countersong turned the entity's hunger back on itself. The carolers collapsed like empty costumes as their stolen voices were devoured. Through the broken windows, I watched Clausville's Christmas lights go dark one by one. The ancient hunger that had fed on our town for generations consumed itself in a cascade of discordant notes that made reality twist and fold like origami. Silence fell. I stood alone in the wreckage of Mom's study, blood freezing on my lips as I wrote the final entry in our family's grimoire. The price of victory was my voice, frozen forever in mid-song, transformed into crystals that hummed with frequencies just beyond human hearing. But I had won. The entity was gone, and its centuries-long song finally ended. I should have burned the book, should have salted the ashes and walked away. But a researcher's curiosity made me keep it, study it, try to understand what the entity had been and what my family's magic had done to stop it. There were other threats out there, other songs that needed to be silenced. Last week I heard singing outside my window, new voices learning old songs. The entity was gone, but its hunger lived on in the carol itself, a mimetic infection spreading through sheet music and choir practices. The music was spreading, teaching itself to new choirs, seeking hosts for a hunger that could never truly die. In my research, I'd found references to other grimoire families and other bloodlines with their own songs of power. Perhaps it was time to find them. I typed this warning because I can no longer speak it. Watch your children when carolers come. Listen carefully to their songs, and if the harmony sounds wrong, just slightly wrong, don't invite them in. Don't let them teach your children their carols. Don't let them spread their music. They're always seeking new voices for their choir, and I've learned there are far worse things than silence. In the margins of the grimoire, I've begun documenting new patterns. Other towns with too perfect church choirs. Shopping malls where the Christmas music makes shoppers pause too long, swaying to rhythms they can't quite hear. Children's pageants where the songs sound a little too beautiful, a little too harmonious. The entity may be gone, but its hunger lives on, teaching itself to new voices, spreading through radio waves and streaming services. The carol is evolving, adapting to the modern world. And somewhere out there, other grimoire keepers are fighting their own battles against the things that steal our songs. I may have lost my voice, but I haven't lost my purpose. The grimoire's pages still have space for new warnings, new spells, and new ways to fight back. After all, every song must end eventually, even the ones that want to sing forever. Silent Belsnickel. The streets of Belsnickel were adorned with glittering tinsel, but tonight all was eerily still. The usual chorus of Christmas carols and drunken laughter had been replaced by a suffocating hush. The wind howled through the deserted streets like a mournful symphony, its icy breath scraping against the gingerbread-trimmed houses. But above it all stood the colossal Belsnickel clock tower, a looming presence that seemed to mock the festive cheer with its frozen face and unrelenting hands, forever pointing at 5 to 12, the infamous witching hour. Legend had it that during this time, the lines between reality and nightmare blurred, and the town's dark underbelly rose to the surface. Martha, bundled in a worn coat, hurried down the deserted street, her breath forming misty clouds in front of her. Every creak of the frost-laden houses, every rustle of wind-blown tinsel sent shivers down her spine. For tonight was Krampus Nacht, when the benevolent St. Nicholas's shadow, the monstrous Krampus, roamed free, seeking out naughty children with his gnarled claws. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence, not from the wind, but from within the clock tower itself. A thrill of fear and curiosity coursed through Martha's veins as she approached the towering structure. With trembling fingers, she pushed open the creaking oak doors and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and carried a metallic tang of old blood. Cobwebs draped themselves over towering gears like macabre lace, and a single flickering candle cast long shadows that seemed to dance with unsettling glee. But despite the eerie atmosphere, Martha couldn't resist, following the source of the scream deeper into the clock tower. And suddenly she saw it, a sight that would forever sear itself into her memory, a tableau of Yuletide terror. Hanging from the massive pendulum of the clock tower, his once jolly belly now gaping open to reveal twisted entrails, was Belsnickel himself. His tongue lolled out in a grotesque parody of a Christmas carol, mocking and taunting all who beheld him. Perched on the minute hand like a malevolent gargoyle sat Krampus, his burning ember eyes gleaming with unholy amusement. With a flick of his tail, the clock's hands spun wildly, as if controlled by some unseen force. The time read 5 minutes to 12. "Time for me to play," he rasped with a voice dripping with malevolence and glee. As the clock struck midnight, the shadows in the tower came alive, writhing and slithering with malicious intent. They transformed into monstrous toys, soldiers with needle-sharp teeth, rocking horses with glowing eyes that seemed to suck all light and warmth from their surroundings, and they descended upon Martha, their cackling echoing through the halls and drowning out the howling wind outside. Martha's screams reverberated through the twisted halls, where she was cornered by disfigured creatures with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes. The clock tower's bells toll in a sinister symphony, drowning out her desperate cries for help. Fear grips her heart as she realizes that Krampus, the demonic punisher of the naughty, has set his sights on her tonight, and there will be no escape from his wrath. The Haunted Chorus. In the small town of Whispering Pines, nestled in the heart of a winter wonderland blanketed by snow and ice, a cherished tradition unfolded each Christmas Eve, the ethereal melody of carolers echoing through the frosty streets. Yet, this year, amidst the serene stillness of the town, the echoes carried an eerie warning, foretelling an unfathomable terror that would forever etch its mark upon the town's history: the chilling tale of the frozen carolers. As twilight descended, a ghostly choir materialized at the town square, their translucent figures swaying in time with the howling wind. Their voices blended seamlessly with the Arctic gusts, weaving a haunting tapestry of melodic enchantment that captivated all who heard it. From their frosted windows, residents peered out at the mesmerizing sight, unaware of the sinister fate that awaited these spectral singers. Among those drawn to the scene were the Montgomery family, wrapped in thick woolen coats and scarves as they ventured into the biting cold. Transfixed by an inexplicable allure towards the haunting harmony, they stepped closer to the carolers' frozen forms. With each sway and crescendo of their mystical chorus, an unworldly aura enveloped them. A sudden gust swept through the square, carrying a supernatural frost that coated the singers in an icy embrace, freezing their ethereal notes into a haunting melody suspended in time. The townspeople watched in awe and fear as a new legend unfolded before their eyes, one rooted in beauty and tragedy, and forever known as the Frozen Carolers. As the last note of the Frozen Carolers faded away, a deafening silence descended upon Whispering Pines. The Montgomery family stood frozen in place, their breaths visible in the frigid air as they gazed at the ethereal figures trapped in their icy prison. Something about the scene felt off to them, and a sense of unease settled in their stomachs. Suddenly, one of the frozen carolers stirred, their translucent form flickering like a dying flame. The Montgomerys watched in horror as the figure broke free of its icy restraints, revealing a twisted and malevolent face that glared at them with burning eyes. A cacophony of screeching laughter erupted from the frozen choir, their ghostly forms contorting into grotesque shapes as they descended upon the Montgomerys. The family tried to run, but their feet remained rooted to the ground as if held in place by an invisible force. The frozen carolers closed in on them, their chilling breath freezing the air around them. The Montgomerys screamed in terror as the spectral singers began to encircle them, their haunting melody now transformed into a demonic chant. As the first of the Montgomerys was dragged away by the twisted carolers, the others realized that there was no escaping the frozen horrors. They closed their eyes and braced themselves for the inevitable fate that awaited them. But then, something unexpected happened. A gust of wind blew through the square once more, carrying with it a warm and inviting melody that sliced through the demonic chanting of the frozen carolers. The Montgomery family opened their eyes to see a new group of carolers approaching them, their faces bathed in golden light. Unlike the frozen carolers, these singers radiated warmth and joy, and their voices were filled with a divine energy that banished the demons back into their icy prison. The new carolers continued to sing, their voices growing more powerful and resonant as they battled against the frozen tendrils of the twisted carolers. The icy grip slowly weakened and cracked, releasing the demonic faces that contorted in agony as they were banished back to the spirit realm from which they came. The Montgomery family stood in awe, their hearts pounding with fear and wonder as they witnessed the battle between good and evil unfold before them. But as the ice melted away, it was replaced with a warm and heavenly melody that filled their souls with joy and hope. The divine carolers disappeared one by one, leaving behind only a lingering sense of peace and protection. The Montgomerys knew that they had narrowly escaped a terrible fate, saved by the power of music and spirit. As they left Whispering Pines behind, they carried with them the knowledge that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope and strength in the face of evil. The Cursed Snowman. The Summers family drove up the winding road, surrounded by towering pines and snow-covered mountains. Their cozy cabin sat at the edge of Frostwood Village, a secluded community known for its annual snow festival. As they settled into their new home, Mrs. Summers couldn't help but notice the giant snowman in the center of town, looming over all with coal-black eyes that seemed to follow their every move. Despite her unease, young Emma was excited for the festival and begged her parents to go. As they walked through the snowy streets, adorned with intricate snow sculptures, a thick fog rolled in. One snowman stood out among the rest, tall and menacing with an evil glint in its eye. Emma wanted to see it up close, but her mother hesitated. As they approached, Emma felt drawn to the snowman, but whispered to her father that she didn't like it there. Suddenly, the giant snowman's ice facade shattered, revealing a grotesque face filled with malice. The ice monster trapped the family in its frosty grip, promising retribution for disturbing its slumber. Mrs. Summers screamed for release, while Mr. Summers desperately searched for a way to protect his family from the cursed creation. The snowman let out a deep, rumbling chuckle. Their breaths turned to visible puffs in the frigid air as they huddled together for warmth. Mr. Summers braced himself against the snowman's icy grip, determined to protect his loved ones. Just as all seemed lost, a haunting melody drifted through the square, carried on a chilling wind. The snowman weakened, and the Summers broke free, their feet pounding against the frozen ground as they ran towards the source of the music. A lone figure standing in the moonlit night, the figure loomed over them, standing at least 7 feet tall, and dressed in a white cloak that shimmered in the moonlight. A delicate silver flute rested in her hands as she gazed down at the snowman with fierce determination. Around her neck hung an intricate amulet, pulsing with ancient power and casting a metallic scent into the air. Her intense blue eyes blazed with otherworldly light as she commanded the snowman to release the trapped Summers family. With a swift movement of her hand and a powerful chant, the snowman began to melt away, leaving behind nothing but a puddle of water on the forest floor. The figure smiled warmly at the Summers family, revealing herself as a guardian of nature, gifted with musical abilities to communicate and harness nature's energy. Emma's heart fluttered with anticipation as she took the flute from the guardian, filled with gratitude for her bravery and swift assistance. As they trudged through the snow-covered square towards their car, the figure explained how she had sensed an eerie energy emanating from the gnarled snowman and followed it there. She thanked them for their bravery and apologized for any distress they may have experienced. "Thank you for saving us," Mr. Summers said as they reached their car. The guardian nodded before suddenly disappearing into thin air, leaving behind only a cluster of colorful flowers where she stood. The group huddled together, laughing and sharing stories as they made their way back to their cozy log cabin, feeling triumphant after conquering the cursed snowman who had terrorized their winter retreat. As the family entered the warmth of their cabin, they shared a look of relief, knowing that they had faced darkness and emerged stronger as a family. Despite returning to their everyday lives and the passing of time, the memory of that fateful night lingered like a haunting melody. It served as a constant reminder to approach with caution when curiosity calls, a lesson that would never be forgotten. The cold chill of fear and uncertainty still clung to their memories, but with it came a newfound wisdom gained from that single moment in time. Every step taken with hesitation, every decision weighed down by the weight of past mistakes, and yet amidst it all, they found solace in the lessons learned and strength forged from adversity. Solitude in the snow. The blizzard roared outside, sending gusts of snow against the windows. Inside, Clara sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the only source of warmth coming from the crackling fireplace. She sipped on eggnog, attempting to shake off the unease that had settled in her stomach like a brick. As she gazed into the flickering flames, she heard a soft tapping coming from upstairs. She set down her glass and cautiously climbed the creaky stairs, her heart pounding with each step. The tapping grew louder as she approached a closed door to the attic, a room she distinctly remembered locking before her family left for their holiday trip. Trembling, she slowly opened the door and was met with a cloud of dust and memories. As she made her way towards a trunk in the corner, the tapping became more urgent. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid and was greeted by a swarm of moths and a porcelain doll. The doll's emerald eyes seemed to follow her every move as she reached out to touch its delicate features. Memories flooded back to her. Memories of this very same doll that she had cherished as a child, but had lost in a move long ago. Her unease turned to longing as she cradled the doll in her arms, feeling its weight and its lifelike features. This was no ordinary doll. It was a piece of her past that had mysteriously returned to her on Christmas Eve. As Clara's fingers closed around the old doll, a chill crawled up her arm, settling in her bones. She felt the weight of its gaze upon her as she lifted it from the dusty attic floor. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed the window shut, and Clara's hand tightened around the doll as if seeking protection. When the moonlight filtered back through the window, she saw that the doll had moved. Its once serene face was now twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. A primal scream ripped from Clara's throat as she stumbled backward, hoping to escape the advancing doll. Its cold porcelain fingers dug into her skin, refusing to let go. In a moment of desperation, Clara clawed at its face until it shattered against the wall. But instead of relief, she was met with horror as the shards reassembled on their own, morphing into an even more sinister form. And the doll wasn't alone. Shadows came alive as other dolls emerged from the darkness, their grinning faces filled with malice. Clara found herself trapped in a macabre dance with these childhood nightmares, their clicking limbs and needle-like teeth closing in on her. She knew then that this was not an attack. It was a feeding frenzy. As they lunged at each other, growling and snarling, a blinding flash of light cut through the room. The front door burst open, sending a gust of snow and cold air into the attic, along with Clara's uncle, a grizzled hunter who had been alerted by her muffled screams. The dolls hissed and recoiled from the light, their porcelain faces twisted in anger. But her uncle was quick to react, his shotgun barking. The sound of gunfire mingled with the shrieks of the dolls, until finally there was silence. Exhausted, Clara collapsed into her uncle's arms, grateful for his warmth against the lingering chill. He explained that the dolls were cursed creations of a vengeful toy maker, their hunger fueled by fear and loneliness. Christmas was their time to reign when darkness was strongest and hearts were coldest. That's why her uncle always made sure to check on Clara, acting as a silent protector against the lurking shadows. Later, as she huddled by the fire, finally feeling its warmth seep into her bones, Clara rectified the chilling truth. She may have been alone in the attic, but fear wasn't just an external force. It could also fester within one's mind, like a porcelain doll waiting to shatter into a nightmare. As the Christmas lights twinkle and carols fill the air, Clara's mind is consumed with painful memories. The laughter and cheer surrounding her only served as a stark reminder of her fragile emotional state. With every smile she forced and every joyful moment she witnessed, she felt the weight of her fears pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. She closed her eyes and whispered a desperate prayer for strength to face the demons haunting her during that supposedly joyous time. The gift. Regret gnawed at me as I unwrapped that accursed gift. The sting of solitude can twist one's logic, particularly on a frost-bitten Christmas Eve, especially after my mom's departure from this world. Embers pirouetted in the fireplace, casting an eerie ballet of shadows across the rustic interior of my secluded mountain refuge. Outside, snow descended in plump, hefty clusters, weaving a quilt of silence over the landscape, a silence so profound it felt like the world was holding its breath, teetering on the precipice of some impending catastrophe. I sat alone in Dad's old leather armchair, nursing my third glass of whiskey. The bottle of Macallan 18 had been Mom's last Christmas gift to me. I'd been saving it for something special, but tonight the memories were too heavy, the silence too loud. 6 months since she'd disappeared, and every day the guilt gnawed deeper. The police report painted a sterile picture. Janet Mitchell, age 58, was last seen leaving Riverside Mall at 9:47 p.m. on June 24th. Security cameras showed her getting into her red Honda Civic. The car was found 3 days later at the old Palmer Mill, engine running, her purse on the passenger seat. The driver's door stood open as if she'd stepped out momentarily. Her phone lay in the footwell, screen cracked, one last unsent message glowing. "Something's wrong. I think it's following me. Please pick up." I'd seen that message 47 times, studying it until the words lost meaning. I'd been asleep when she called, phone on silent. 3 missed calls between 9:52 and 10:16 p.m. By the time I checked my phone the next morning, I took another swallow and the whiskey burned going down, but not enough to wash away the bitter taste of regret. Detective Martinez still called weekly, but his updates had grown shorter, his voice carrying that careful tone people use when they don't want to say what they're thinking. The case had gone cold faster than anyone expected. Nobody, no witnesses, no clues except for one detail the police kept quiet: the strange tracks in the mud near her car. Not human, not animal, like something had been dragging itself along the ground. I'd moved to Mom's cabin 3 months ago, partly to be closer to the investigation, partly to escape the suffocating sympathy of city life. The cabin had always been her sanctuary, a place she'd retreat to when the world became too much. Now it was mine, though I'd barely touched her things. Her gardening gloves were still hung by the back door. Her favorite mug sat unwashed in the sink, lipstick stain marking where she'd taken her last sip of tea. The grandfather clock in the hall, another family heirloom, struck 11, its chimes echoing through the empty rooms. Snow whispered against the windows, and the wind moaned through the pines. Perfect weather for ghosts, Mom would have said. She'd loved horror stories, especially around Christmas. Used to tell me tales of the Yule lads and Grilla, the Icelandic Christmas witch. "Winter nights are long for a reason," she'd say. "They give the dark things time to play." A knock at the door shattered my reverie. I sat frozen, glass halfway to my lips. Up here, visitors were rare even in good weather. In a snowstorm? Impossible. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles down the mountain road, and I hadn't been expecting any deliveries. I'd made sure of that, canceling every subscription, every service that might bring a stranger to my door. The knock came again. 3 sharp raps, too rhythmic to be a branch in the wind. "Hello?" I called out, hating the tremor in my voice. "Who's there?" Silence answered. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I rose unsteadily, the whiskey making the room tilt slightly. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, maple and oak, laid by my grandfather's hands decades ago. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. "Don't answer it," a small voice whispered in my head. The same voice that had urged me to check on Mom that night, the voice I'd ignored. Some doors should stay closed. But curiosity, or perhaps something darker, something that had been waiting for this moment, drew me forward. I reached for the doorknob, its brass surface ice cold against my palm. The door swung open to reveal nothing, just swirling snow and darkness, the motion sensor light casting a sickly yellow glow across the front porch. As I turned to go back inside, my foot struck something solid. A package wrapped in shimmering red paper with a golden bow. No card, no note. Just my name scrawled in spidery handwriting that seemed familiar, yet wrong somehow. Like someone trying to imitate handwriting they'd only seen once. Or like familiar hands being forced to write by something else. I brought it inside, studying it in the firelight. The box was about the size of a shoebox, surprisingly heavy for its size. A faint, metallic smell emanated from it, like copper pennies, like blood, but underneath that, another scent. Mom's perfume, Chanel No. 5, mixed with something earthier, possibly decay. "Don't open it," the voice pleaded, but the whiskey had loosened my inhibitions and my fingers were already tearing at the paper. It came away too easily, as if eager to reveal its contents. Inside was a plain cardboard box, water-stained at the corners. Dark fluid had seeped through in places, leaving rusty coronas on the cardboard. The lid was sealed with clear packing tape, the kind Mom always kept in her craft room. I lifted the lid and peered inside. Horror. A human hand, severed at the wrist, lay nestled in red tissue paper. The skin was waxy pale, the fingernails painted a festive green, Mom's favorite shade, hollyberry bright. A gold ring adorned the third finger, a familiar ruby glinting in the firelight like an accusing eye. Mom's ring, Mom's hand. I recognized every detail. The small scar on the thumb, from when she'd cut herself gardening last spring. The slight bend in her middle finger from an old break that never healed quite right. The delicate silver bracelet I'd given her for Mother's Day, engraved with our birth dates, now tarnished and crusted with something dark. Even her wedding ring was still there, though Dad had been gone 5 years now. I recoiled, the box tumbling from my numb fingers. The hand spilled out, fingers splayed as if reaching for me. A scream built in my throat, but before it could escape, every light in the cabin went out simultaneously. Even the fire seemed to dim as if something was feeding on its light. I was plunged into darkness, save for the feeble glow of the dying embers. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound came from behind me, something dragging across the hardwood floor. I whirled, heart pounding, eyes straining in the gloom. The temperature in the room plummeted, and my breath clouded in the air. The whiskey glass slipped from my trembling hand, shattering on the floor. A shape, low to the ground, moving. The severed hand pulled itself toward me with grotesque, jerky movements. Fingers flexing, grasping, leaving a trail of blackened fluid that smoked slightly where it touched the floor. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was the writing. Tiny words carved into the flesh, so small I had to squint to read them. "Should have answered when I called. Should have come when I needed you. Now you'll know how it feels to be taken apart." I stumbled backward, tripping over the coffee table and crashing to the floor. Shards of the broken whiskey glass bit into my palms. The hand scuttled closer, faster now, like some obscene spider. I could see ragged tendons and bone protruding from the wrist, glistening wetly in the firelight. Each movement was accompanied by a wet, clicking sound, like someone cracking their knuckles. My phone. Where was my phone? I patted my pockets frantically and found nothing. There, on the mantel, just a few feet away, if I could only reach it. The hand leaped, cold, lifeless fingers wrapped around my throat, squeezing, choking. The silver bracelet pressed against my windpipe, burning like ice. I clawed at it, trying to pry the fingers loose, but they only tightened their grip. The engraved birth dates dug into my flesh like tiny knives. The stench of decay filled my nostrils, sweet and cloying. My vision began to blur. But through the tears, I saw something that made my blood run colder than the hand at my throat. More packages, appearing one by one on the hearth, materializing from the shadows. Red paper, gold bows, different sizes, but all wrapped the same way, all bearing my name in that twisted handwriting, all leaking dark fluid onto the hearthstones. As darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, I heard it, soft at first, then growing louder, the jingling of sleigh bells. But wrong, discordant, like broken glass in a metal drum, like screams set to music. A laugh echoed through the night, not jolly, not merry, hungry. The last thing I saw before consciousness faded was a face at the window. Pale, gaunt, razor-sharp teeth bared in a rictus grin. The creature's antlers cast twisted shadows on the wall, like reaching hands, like bare winter branches ready to snatch and sever. Its eyes were black as coal, but in their depths, I saw something familiar. Mom's ruby ring glinting like a drop of blood, and behind it, deeper in those endless black eyes, I saw her face. Screaming, warning, trying to tell me something I couldn't quite understand. "Merry Christmas," it mouthed, its breath frosting the glass in patterns that looked like tortured faces. "I'll be back for the rest soon, piece by piece, just like her, just like all the others who didn't answer when they were called." In the distance, sirens wailed, Detective Martinez responding to the 911 call I'd never made. But I knew he'd find nothing when he arrived. Nothing except a trail of presents leading into the woods, one for each piece of me wrapped with care by hands that used to tuck me in at night. The last thing I heard, before the hand squeezed out my final breath, was Mom's voice. Not from the creature, but from my phone on the mantel. A voicemail, playing itself on the loudspeaker. "Honey, please pick up, it's following me. Don't let it in, no matter what it wraps itself in. Don't open..." Static swallowed the rest, followed by the sound of sleigh bells. The Yule log's burning song, the imposing house of Dudley, cloaked in a thick fog and steeped in centuries-old secrets, buzzed with the forced merriment of Christmas. Alice, a young guest spending the holidays at the grand estate, couldn't shake off the prickling unease that crawled across her skin like frost. The ancient Yule log, crackling and spitting sparks in the grand hearth, seemed to whisper dark secrets with its fiery tongues. As the flames danced, Alice could swear she saw grotesque shapes shifting within them, shadowy figures with glowing eyes, their chilling laughter echoing through the air. The firelight flickered and cast eerie shadows on the walls, twisting ordinary objects into monstrous caricatures. Night after night, Alice was plagued by nightmares. She dreamt of the Yule log bursting open, revealing a writhing mass of teeth and claws. A cold, ancient voice rasped in her ear, "Feed me, child. Feed me your fear." In a fit of terror, Alice would wake up screaming, the image of the once charming Yule log now etched in her mind as something sinister. The other guests seemed to shy away from her presence, their eyes full of a chilling secret. Driven by morbid curiosity and a sense of duty, Alice ventured into the forbidden library of the manor. Dusty tomes spoke of a pagan entity bound to the Yule log for generations, a soul-devouring creature that fed on the fear and darkness of those who celebrated Christmas under its roof. Alice knew she had to take action, so she gathered herbs and ancient symbols, remnants of long-forgotten rituals passed down through generations. And as her family gathered for the lavish Christmas feast in the grand hall, Alice slipped into the fireplace room. The fire roared and crackled, casting eerie shadows on every surface. Alice, steeling her nerves and taking a deep breath, began the long-forgotten ritual of banishment. She chanted the ancient words with fervor, the air growing thick and heavy around her as the flames danced erratically and the shadows writhed on the walls. Without warning, the Yule log exploded. From within it emerged a horrific mass of teeth and claws, a monstrous entity born of darkness and fear. Alice's heart pounded against her chest as she faced the creature head-on, channeling all her fear into the ancient ritual. Her chanting rose to a deafening crescendo, the symbols glowing with blinding light. The entity screeched, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. But Alice stood firm, her determination fueled by the love and protection of her family. With one final ear-splitting shriek, the creature dissipated into wisps of smoke, retreating into the depths of the Yule log. Alice collapsed, exhausted and trembling from the weight of the ordeal. Her family rushed in, their faces etched with horror and relief. The Yule log lay in ruins, a blackened and ominous reminder of the terrifying power it once held. Despite the ongoing holiday festivities, Alice could not shake the chilling truth she had uncovered. The spirit of Christmas had been corrupted and twisted into a vessel for something far more ancient and sinister. And she, just a young girl on a winter holiday, had valiantly confronted that darkness and emerged victorious, bearing the weight of her secret triumph like a battle scar etched into the pristine snow. Antique snow globe. Sally's fingers brushed the dusty attic floor as she reached for the forgotten trinkets. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the antique snow globe, a charming Christmas scene frozen in time. But something was unsettling about it. The way the snowflakes seemed to swirl with a malevolent life of their own, and the villagers had unsettling glints in their eyes. That night, she dreamt of the snow globe. The once idyllic village was now filled with terror, as monstrous snowmen with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws chased down the villagers. The snow, once innocent, became a threat as it swirled in a vicious vortex. Sally woke up in a cold sweat, the dream clinging to her like a shroud. She couldn't shake the feeling that the snow globe held a darkness, a secret waiting to be unleashed. Driven by morbid curiosity, she tilted the globe and watched as the miniature snow fell like a blizzard. But as she tilted it, the world inside shifted. The peaceful village disappeared, replaced by a desolate landscape bathed in crimson light. Grotesque creatures emerged from the swirling snow, their eyes burning with hunger. And then she saw her room reflected in the snow globe. The miniature figures climbed out, their faces twisted into grotesque versions of her fear. The snow, no longer just a small spectacle, became a real blizzard that filled her room with biting cold and whispering horrors. Sally shook with fear as she realized that her dream was becoming reality before her very eyes. Sally's screams echoed off the walls as she frantically scrambled away from the creatures. She felt their icy claws rake across her skin, draining her life force with each touch. The boundaries between reality and the snow globe blurred into a dizzying vortex threatening to consume her. But in a last act of defiance, Sally summoned the memory of her art, the very thing that had always guided her through life. With gritted teeth, she channeled all of her fear, anger, and passion into creating a powerful image in her mind, a radiant sun bursting through the snowy landscape within the globe. As this image solidified in her mind, a blinding light erupted from within the snow globe. The miniature sun, fueled by Sally's will, blazed with an intensity that rivaled 1,000 suns. The creatures wailed in agony as they dissolved into nothing but wisps of ice and shadow. The snow globe shattered under the power of Sally's creation, restoring it to a peaceful Christmas scene. Exhausted but alive, Sally collapsed beside the broken snow globe. As she caught her breath, she noticed that the room was no longer filled with harsh coldness and dark shadows. Instead, warm sunlight streamed through her window, illuminating the room. And outside, the frozen nightmare sparkled like a winter wonderland, with millions of tiny diamonds glistening on a fresh layer of snow. Sally's hands trembled as she held the snow globe, its intricate details reflecting the twinkling light. As the last flakes settled, Sally stared at the peaceful winter scene, but her mind still reeled from the horrors she had witnessed inside the snow globe. Yet, amidst the fear, she saw a glimmer of hope, a reminder of her strength and resilience in the face of unimaginable terrors. Sally made a sacred vow to herself. She would not succumb to fear. With her gift of art, she would only create beauty that would shield her against the nightmarish whispers of the snow globe. Frozen in fear, outside a blizzard raged, unleashing its fury upon the cabin like a monstrous beast. The windows rattled and groaned under the relentless assault of icy fingers, threatening to shatter and expose the 5 friends huddled inside. They sat around the dying embers of a Yule log, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames in a tableau of fear and anticipation. The air hung heavy with the scent of mulled wine and unspoken secrets, as their host, Grimnir, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming like obsidian shards in the firelight. "Tonight," Grimnir rasped, his voice barely audible over the howling wind, "we delve into a tale not for the faint of heart, a Yuletide tapestry woven with threads of dread, where the line between festive cheer and bone-chilling terror blurs beyond recognition." The friends exchanged nervous glances, their breaths visible in the frigid air. As if on cue, the fire sputtered and cast grotesque shadows that danced across the walls like skeletal marionettes. Despite his usual warmth and charm, Grimnir now seemed predatory, his smile stretched thin over sharp, gleaming teeth. "This chilling saga," he crooned, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "transpires not in some haunted manor on a windswept hill, but right here, in this very cabin." These very logs, once crackling merrily with festive cheer, bore witness to a Yuletide so dark it would curdle your eggnog and turn your gingerbread brittle to dust. Suddenly, a deafening crash erupted from above. sending a shower of snow and ice cascading down the chimney. The friends shrieked and scrambled back, their faces drained of color. Grimnir's grin widened, revealing a glint of something sharp and malevolent beneath his weathered facade. "Seems our tale," he purred, his voice dripping with an unholy glee that sent shivers down their spines, "has taken a rather festive turn. Perhaps, my dears, we're not just listening to the story anymore." The shadows in the dimly lit corners of the cabin writhed and pulsed, taking on grotesque forms that mocked traditional holiday figures. The once comforting scent of mulled wine now turned acrid, laced with a metallic tang that hinted at blood. As the first tendrils of darkness snaked towards them, the friends could hear Grimnir's maniacal laughter echoing through the cabin, a chilling counterpoint to the howling blizzard outside. "Now, my dears," he rasped, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly hunger, "let's see who's truly naughty this year." The roaring fire flickered and died, snuffing out all warmth in an instant. The cabin was engulfed in a suffocating darkness, a thick veil that seemed to smother the very air they breathed. The huddled friends trembled with fear, their whispers drowned out by the deafening silence that enveloped them. Every sense alert, they strained their eyes to pierce through the shadows, dreading the next creeping tendril of darkness that would surely bring with it unspeakable horrors. They knew with a bone-chilling certainty that Grimnir's tale was no mere ghost story. It was a sinister prophecy, and they were now trapped within its merciless grasp, at the mercy of whatever nightmarish fate awaited them. Deck the halls. As twilight bled into the horizon, the Christmas tree farm transformed into an ethereal wonderland. Pines, frosted with fresh snowfall, stood in grandeur, their branches sagging under the weight of winter's white blanket. It was picture perfect, a scene ripped straight from a holiday card or plucked from one of those Hallmark movies Karen adored before our love crumbled like stale gingerbread. Back in those days of make-believe when we thought we could mend our splintering family with strands of tinsel and the rhythm of age-old traditions. If only I'd known what horrors waited beneath that pristine blanket of snow, patient as winter itself. The temperature had been dropping steadily since we arrived, our breath crystallizing in clouds that hung motionless in the unnaturally still air. The sun was sinking faster than it should, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist between the endless rows of trees. But Claudia didn't notice any of this. She was too excited about picking out her first Christmas tree for her new room at my place. Claudia tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide with excitement behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "Can we get that one, Daddy?" She pointed to a towering blue spruce, at least 9 feet tall. Her enthusiasm made my chest ache. These monthly visits were all I had left after Karen won primary custody, and I was determined to make each one count. Even if it meant driving an hour to this remote tree farm Claudia had found online, insisting it had the most perfect trees ever. I should have wondered why the website had no reviews, no photos of happy families, just an address and a cryptic promise. "Find the tree that's meant for you." I chuckled, attempting to ignore the hollow feeling in my stomach. Bit big for the living room, don't you think? I didn't mention that my small apartment could barely fit a 6-footer, another reminder of how far I'd fallen from our old life in the suburbs. Claudia pouted, adjusting her red wool coat, the one Karen had bought her for Christmas last year when we were still a family. Then she darted off toward another tree, her long dark braids bouncing against her back. I followed, axe in hand, breath misting in the cold air. The weight of the tool felt wrong somehow, like it was getting heavier with each step, the metal growing colder than the winter air could explain. We wandered deeper into the farm, past the carefully manicured rows near the entrance. The trees here were different. Older, twisted things with branches that seemed to reach for us as we passed. Their needles were a darker green, almost black in the fading light, and they swayed slightly despite the lack of wind. The crowds had thinned out gradually, then disappeared entirely. An uneasy feeling crept over me, a primal warning that something wasn't right. The silence was the first thing I noticed. No distant chatter of other families, no crunch of snow under tires from the parking lot. Even the wind had died, leaving us in a pocket of absolute stillness that made my ears ring. The air smelled wrong too. Not the fresh pine scent from earlier, but something older, like wet earth and decay. "Claudia," I called, my voice sounding flat and dead in the frozen air. "Let's head back. It's getting dark." I checked my phone for the time, but the screen was black. Dead battery? No. The cold seemed to have killed it completely. I got no response from Claudia, so I called again. "Claudia?" Panic rose in my throat, bitter as bile. I spun around, searching. Nothing but endless rows of trees, their branches seeming to reach for me in the growing gloom. Had they moved closer? I could have sworn the path behind us was wider just moments ago. The trees seemed to have shifted, creating a maze of narrow corridors that all looked the same. A giggle, faint, carried on a wind that shouldn't exist in this unnatural stillness. It sounded like Claudia, but distorted somehow, as if heard underwater or through thick glass. I ran toward the sound, branches whipping my face, leaving stinging cuts that felt more like claw marks than scratches. The needles seemed to reach for me, drawing blood that froze almost instantly in the rapidly dropping temperature. Another giggle. Behind me now. I whirled, the axe slipping from my numb fingers and disappearing into the snow with a muffled thud that sounded far too wet. The loss of my only weapon sent a fresh wave of terror through me. At that moment, I realized I'd been gripping it not to cut down a tree, but because some part of me had sensed the wrongness of this place from the start. A flash of red coat disappeared behind a massive trunk, but something was wrong with how she moved, jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. The color of her coat seemed too bright against the twilight, more like fresh blood than wool. "This isn't funny," I shouted, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. "Come out right now." I tried to sound stern and authoritative, like a father should, but fear made my voice crack. The wind returned with sudden violence, howling through the trees with a sound too much like screaming. Snow swirled around me, obscuring my vision, but in the chaos, I caught glimpses of things that shouldn't be there. Faces in the bark, shadows moving against the wind, and worst of all, tiny footprints in the snow filling with something dark and wet that glistened like sap but smelled like old copper. I stumbled forward, disoriented, fighting the rising hysteria. The temperature had dropped so drastically that each breath felt like swallowing glass, the air so cold it burned my lungs. My foot caught on something solid beneath the snow. I went down hard, face first into the white powder that no longer felt like snow at all. It was too warm, too sticky, with a metallic taste that made me gag. Pushing myself up, I turned to ascertain what I'd tripped over. The scream froze in my throat. A pale and lifeless hand protruded from the snow. The fingers were locked in a grasping position, and the wrist bore a familiar bracelet. The charm bracelet I'd given Karen on our 10th anniversary, just months before everything fell apart. Each charm represented a year of our marriage, ending with a tiny silver heart that matched the one Claudia wore on a chain around her neck. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding. As I watched, the snow began to shift. More hands emerged. Arms, torsos, bodies. Dozens of them rose from their wintry graves. Men, women, children, all wearing tattered Christmas sweaters and Santa hats, their flesh bearing the marks of prolonged exposure to cold. Blackened fingers, frost-burned cheeks, blue-tinged lips pulled back in rictus grins. Some wore wedding rings that glinted dully in the fading light. Others clutched small toys or fragments of Christmas decorations, eternal reminders of the holiday joy they'd sought here. Their eyes opened in unison. "Welcome," they sang in a horrifying chorus that made my teeth vibrate and my bones ache. "We've been waiting for you. All of us who came looking for the perfect tree. All of us who wanted to make Christmas special again, to make our families whole." I attempted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Glancing down, I watched as pale hands gripped my ankles, pulling me down into the snow. The flesh of the hands was marked with dozens of tiny puncture wounds like something had burrowed through them, and in some spots, small evergreen needles sprouted from the frozen skin. "Claudia!" I screamed one last time, my voice hoarse with terror. "Where are you?" A small figure stepped out from behind a massive pine. My daughter. But her eyes. Oh God. Her eyes were glowing red like the others, and her skin had taken on the waxy translucence of deep frozen meat. Clusters of tiny branches and needles had sprouted from where her mittened hands once were, resembling sharp claws. Her braids had become woody vines that writhed and twisted in the Arctic air. "I'm right here, Daddy," she said, her voice distorted and inhuman, resonating with the sound of cracking ice and splintering wood. "I found the perfect tree for us. It's been so lonely, you see. It needs a family, just like I did after you left. But now we can be together forever, just like you promised." She gestured behind her. What I had thought was a pine tree slowly unfurled. Branches became arms, dozens of them, each tipped with needles sharp as razors. The trunk twisted and stretched into a grotesque body that towered above us, bark splitting to reveal pulsing amber sap that dripped like honey onto the snow, melting it to reveal more bodies beneath, perfectly preserved in the frozen earth. Generations of lost souls, all seeking the perfect Christmas now part of its eternal collection. Its bark-covered face split into a grin full of icicle teeth, and in its features, I saw a hideous reflection of my own. This was what had been calling to us all along, drawing broken families to this cursed place, with the promise of perfect Christmas memories. It fed not on flesh or blood, but on the desperate longing for connection, for the warmth of holidays past. "Merry Christmas," it rumbled, its voice the sound of avalanches and splitting wood. "You'll never have to leave her again. No more custody battles, no more lonely holidays, just one perfect, endless Christmas." As I sank into the snow, surrounded by the undead chorus of "Deck the Halls," sung in voices cracked by frost and decay, I realized the horrible truth that all these other lost souls had discovered too late. We hadn't come to choose a Christmas tree. The Christmas tree had chosen us, adding us to its eternal forest family, another set of decorations for its ever-growing collection of broken homes made whole again in death. Each light on its branches was a captured soul, each ornament a frozen heart. In the distance, I heard car doors slamming and voices calling out in excitement. New customers arriving at the farm, new families searching for the perfect tree, drawn by the same mysterious website that had lured us here. The last thing I saw before the snow closed over my face was Claudia's twisted form, skipping away between the trees, her branch fingers beckoning to the newcomers, leading them deeper into the forest where the perfect tree waited to welcome them home. Forever. And somewhere in that eternal winter night, a computer screen glows with a new review on the tree farm's website. "Found the perfect tree. Will never leave." The Mistletoe Curse, the heart of Evergreen Hollow, was a twisted amalgamation of festivity and horror. Centuries-old traditions mingled with the scent of pine, but a peculiar mistletoe held a sinister secret that would make even the bravest of souls cower in fear. The Mistletoe Curse whispered among the town's cobblestone pathways, bringing a chill to the very bones of those who dared to listen. For generations, this seemingly innocuous plant harbored a malevolent force, waiting for unsuspecting victims to get ensnared beneath its boughs. The Thompson family, newcomers to Evergreen Hollow, arrived on the cusp of the Yuletide season, blissfully unaware of the town's hidden menace. Drawn by the nostalgic allure of a small town's holiday charm, they settled into their quaint cottage, oblivious to the horrors lurking just beyond their doorstep. As the winter days shortened and the air grew heavy with anticipation, the townsfolk adorned their streets and homes with vibrant decorations. Yet amidst the shimmering lights and cheerful carols, the mischievous mistletoe hung in unsuspecting doorways like a noose waiting to snap shut around its prey. Its festive guise concealed a ghastly fate for those unlucky enough to find themselves trapped beneath its deadly embrace. The Thompsons felt their spirits lifted by the festivity that permeated Evergreen Hollow. They spent their days exploring the town's shops and restaurants, marveling at the decorations and indulging in sweet holiday treats. But as the nights grew longer, a sense of unease began to take hold. The mistletoe haunted their dreams, its white berries dripping with blood and its leaves wilting like the dead. One evening, while walking home from dinner, they found themselves lost in the maze of winding streets. The mist was thick, and a soul-chilling cold settled into their bones. It was then that they stumbled upon an old abandoned mansion, looming ominously in the darkness. They felt drawn towards it, as if some force was pulling them closer. As they approached the front door, they noticed a small sprig of mistletoe hanging from the doorknob. Without thinking, Mr. Thompson reached out to remove it, but his hand froze in midair. A voice, soft and alluring, whispered in his ear, "Leave it be, dear sir. It's better to stay on the safe side." The Thompsons turned around, but no one was there. They exchanged a glance of confusion before hesitantly pushing open the mansion's front door. The inside of the mansion was dark and devoid of any holiday cheer. The air was still, and the silence was deafening. The only sound was the creaking of wooden floorboards beneath their feet. They explored the first floor, finding nothing out of the ordinary, but as they climbed the grand staircase towards the second floor, the temperature dropped drastically. Their breaths came out in visible puffs as they huddled together for warmth. They reached the top of the stairs and found a long hallway with several doors. As they approached one of the doors, they heard a faint whispering coming from inside. They slowly pushed open the door to reveal a room filled with mistletoe. The sweet, earthy scent of the plant filled their noses, but there was something off about it. The leaves were drooping, and the berries were black and oozing a strange liquid. Suddenly, they heard the same soft voice from before. "Welcome to my home. I see you found my collection." A figure emerged from the shadows, its face obscured by a hooded cloak. "I am the keeper of mistletoe, and it seems that you have stumbled upon my sanctuary." The Thompsons tried to back away, but their feet seemed rooted to the spot. The hooded figure approached them, its eyes glinting in the darkness. "You see, mistletoe is a powerful plant. It has the ability to draw out desires from within us, whether they be good or bad." Mr. Thompson felt a sudden surge of desire overwhelm him. He wanted to touch the mistletoe, to taste its bitter sap, to feel its leaves against his skin. He reached out his hand towards the plant, but the hooded figure stopped him. The figure said. "You mustn't touch it just yet. First, you must make a choice." "A choice?" Mrs. Thompson asked, feeling a sense of unease. "Yes," the hooded figure said. "You must choose between temptation and restraint. Will you give in to your desires or resist them?" The Thompsons looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Mr. Thompson's desire for the mistletoe was still pulsing through him, but he didn't want to give in so easily. Mrs. Thompson, on the other hand, felt a sense of fear and wanted nothing to do with the plant. I choose restraint," Mr. Thompson finally said, his hand still hovering inches away from the mistletoe. "Very well," the hooded figure said, nodding. "Restraint it is." The figure then lifted its hood, revealing a face that was both beautiful and terrifying. Its eyes were a bright emerald green, and its lips were painted a deep red. The Thompsons couldn't help but stare in awe and fear. "Good choice," the figure said with a smile. "Restraint is a virtue that is often underappreciated." The figure then gestured towards the mistletoe. "You may touch it now, but be warned, once you do, you will be forever bound to its power." Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment, but the desire was too strong. He reached out his hand and touched the mistletoe. As soon as he did, he felt a rush of energy surge through him. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, savoring the feeling. Mrs. Thompson watched in horror as her husband's face contorted with pleasure. Suddenly, Mr. Thompson let out a loud moan and collapsed onto the ground, writhing in ecstasy. Mrs. Thompson knelt beside him, trying to shake him awake, but he was unresponsive. The hooded figure stood by, watching the scene unfold with a smirk on its face. "He was warned," the figure said nonchalantly. "He made his choice." Mrs. Thompson felt a mix of emotions: anger, fear, and sadness. She couldn't believe what had happened to her husband. She looked up at the figure, now feeling a sense of hatred towards it. "What have you done to him?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the clearing. The figure chuckled. "I haven't done anything. Your husband simply gave in to his desires. He chose the mistletoe over restraint." Mrs. Thompson stood up, fists clenched. "I demand you fix this." The figure sighed. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Once the mistletoe has taken hold, there's no going back." Mrs. Thompson felt her heart break as the truth of her husband's fate hit her like a ton of bricks. She was engulfed in a state of both grief and joy, knowing he would never be free from this endless cycle of pleasure and pain. She sank to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, broken by her own mistakes. Yet at the same time, a warmth spread through her body as she noticed the mistletoe, a reminder that her husband had chosen his own destiny, regardless of what it cost him or his family. Santa's Dark Secret, Part 1. Snowflakes like glittering stars shimmered in the night sky as the Winters family braved the frigid path towards Evergreen Valley. Within its frost-kissed pines and winter winds lay a shimmering paradise, the North Pole. But beyond the blanket of joy that cloaked this haven was a chilling secret, harbored by the mysterious figure known as Santa Claus. For generations, children have wished upon his sleigh with bated breath, believing that only goodness lies beneath. But beneath the facade of twinkling lights and joyful carols lurked an ominous truth about to be unveiled by those who dared to seek. The Winters family journeyed into the abyss of the North Pole, expecting whimsy and enchantment. But instead, their bravery exposed a sinister revelation that forever tainted the mirth of the season. As they trudged through the whimsical wonderland of the North Pole, escorted by elves with eyes that glinted like knives and cheeks flushed with a poisonous fever, an icy sense of unease skittered through the frost-laden air. The magic of Christmas had been twisted into something sinister, malevolence lurking beneath the surface like a shark prowling just below the waves. Yet the Winters remained oblivious to the danger that stalked them, their excitement blinding them to all else but presents and decorations. The night of their arrival, as the family settled into their cozy lodge adorned with tinsel and stockings hung with care, a curious discovery awaited them. An ancient tome, buried within the depths of the bookshelf, its pages adorned with cryptic symbols and warnings, etched in faded blood. Unfolding the secrets within, they unearthed a harrowing truth, a truth that shattered the myth of Santa Claus forever, revealing a ghastly entity that masqueraded as the jovial gift-giver, feeding on the innocence of children to sustain its monstrous existence. With each page they turned, the Winters family's hearts grew heavier. They had unknowingly stumbled upon a dark conspiracy, one that threatened to consume them if they didn't act fast. The entity, known only as Krampus, was a demon of old, banished by St. Nicholas himself for its wicked ways. But over time, it had regained its strength and slowly infiltrated the world of humans through the guise of Santa Claus, luring innocent children into its grasp with promises of toys and candy. The Winters family knew they had to act swiftly if they were to stop Krampus from taking any more children. Armed with the knowledge they had uncovered in the ancient tome, they set out to find the source of Krampus's power. It wasn't long before they discovered the dark heart of the North Pole, a place where the ice shimmered black and the air was thick with the stench of decay. There, in the very heart of Krampus's lair, lay a cursed tree, its branches gnarled and twisted like the fingers of a corpse. This was the source of Krampus's power, and they knew that they had to destroy it if they were to save the innocent children from his grasp. But as they approached the tree, a sense of foreboding washed over them. They could feel Krampus's malevolent presence lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting for them to make a misstep. With trembling hands, they lit the ancient torches they had brought with them and approached the cursed tree. As they drew closer, the ground shook beneath their feet, and the air grew thick with the stench of brimstone. Suddenly, Krampus emerged from the shadows, his elongated horns gleaming in the firelight. His eyes were filled with a hunger that chilled the Winters family to their very bones. But they stood their ground, determined to protect the innocent children from his grasp. With a menacing growl, Krampus charged towards them, his clawed hands outstretched. The Winters family held their ground, brandishing their weapons at the demon. As Krampus drew closer, they could see the veins on his forehead bulging with rage, and his breath was like a hot gust of wind. The battle was fierce and unrelenting. Krampus moved with an unnatural grace, his body contorting and twisting in ways that no human could. But the Winters family fought with all their might, determined to destroy him and free the children from his grasp. As the battle raged on, the cursed tree began to shake violently. Its branches whipped back and forth, and its roots began to rip free from the frozen soil. It was as if the very earth itself was trying to protect Krampus. But the Winters family persisted, hacking and slashing at the demon's flesh with their weapons. And then, with one final blow, the cursed tree let out an agonizing scream and burst into a million splinters, sending shockwaves through the forest. Krampus let out a guttural howl of pain and disappeared into the darkness. The Winters family collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, their bodies battered and bruised. But they had succeeded in their mission. The innocent children were safe once again, and Krampus was banished back to the underworld where he belonged. As they looked up at the starry sky above, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had faced the demon of the winter solstice and emerged victorious. And they knew that they would always be remembered as heroes in the eyes of the villagers, who would tell tales of their bravery for generations to come. But their sense of victory soon turned to dread as they heard a low growling sound coming from the darkness. Suddenly, a pack of wolves emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing fiercely in the moonlight. The Winters family scrambled to their feet, readying their weapons once again. But the wolves were too fast, and they surrounded the family before they could mount a proper defense. With a snarl, the leader of the pack lunged at the eldest member of the family, who swung his sword with all his might. The blade connected with the wolf's neck, severing its head from its body in a spray of blood. The rest of the pack didn't seem deterred by their leader's demise, however, and continued to attack with reckless abandon. The family fought valiantly, but it was clear that they were outnumbered and outmatched. Just as the wolves were about to launch a final assault, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a woman, cloaked in a long, flowing robe of deep crimson. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her hair flowed around her face like tendrils of black smoke. The wolves hesitated for a moment, as if sensing her power, and the Winters family took advantage of the pause to regroup. The woman raised her hands, and a blast of energy shot from her fingertips, sending several of the wolves flying backwards. With a fierce determination, the woman continued to fight alongside the family, her powers growing stronger with each passing moment. Together they battled the pack of wolves, until finally, the last one lay still on the ground. Breathless and exhausted, the Winters family turned to thank their mysterious savior. But she was already gone, disappearing into the darkness once again. Shaken but grateful, they made their way back to the village. As they walked, they spoke in hushed tones about the strange woman who had come to their aid. Days passed, and the Winters family couldn't shake off the memory of the woman in the crimson robe. They talked about her at every meal, wondering who she could be and where she came from. Some said she was a witch, others said she was an angel sent from God himself. But one thing was for sure, they all agreed that they wouldn't have survived that night without her. As the days turned into weeks, the memory of the pack of wolves that had attacked them began to fade. Life in the village went back to normal, and the Winters family went back to their daily routine of farming and hunting. But deep down, they all knew that something wasn't right. One night, as they sat around the fire, they heard a faint knock at the door. Curious but cautious, the eldest member of the family approached the door and opened it slowly. There she stood, the woman in the crimson robe. "Please come in," the eldest member of the family said, gesturing for the woman to enter. The woman stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room before settling on the family. "I've been watching you," she said, her voice low and melodic. "You are brave and strong. I can see that you will need my help again soon." The family looked at one another in confusion. "What do you mean?" one of them asked. "There is a darkness coming," the woman said, her eyes growing dark. "A darkness that threatens to swallow this village whole. But with my help, you can fight it. You can protect your home." Without another word, the woman in the crimson robe turned and left the house, disappearing once again into the night. The Winters family spent the next few days in a state of unease. They didn't know what the woman meant by darkness, but they knew that they had to be prepared. so they stockpiled weapons and supplies, training themselves in the art of combat and survival. They spent endless hours perfecting their techniques, readying themselves for the moment when the woman in the crimson robe would return. And return she did. One evening, as they were sitting around the fire once again, they heard the unmistakable sound of howling in the distance. It was louder than any other howl they had heard before, and it sent shivers down their spines. Without warning, the door burst open and a pack of wolves charged into the room. The Winters family fought bravely, slashing and stabbing at the beasts with their weapons. But it soon became clear that they were outnumbered. Just as they thought they would be overcome, the woman in the crimson robe appeared once again, wielding a staff made of twisted wood. With one swift motion, she sent the wolves flying backwards, their bodies slamming against the walls. "You have done well," she said, her eyes glowing in the dim light. "But this is only the beginning. The true darkness is still to come." The Winters family stared at each other, a conflicting range of emotions apparent on their faces. Fear and courage clashed within them. They knew the danger that lay ahead of them, yet they refused to back down. "We're ready," one of them declared, determinedly. But in the same breath, they murmured questions of doubt. Was this really the right choice? Could they survive what was coming for them? The woman in the crimson robe nodded slowly, a smirk playing on her lips. "It's here," she muttered ominously, "and it's going to be worse than anything you've ever seen before." She whirled around and left the room, leaving behind an air of indifference as the Winters family contemplated their impending doom. Unwillingness to surrender warred with their courage. What would happen if they were to turn away now? Yet, despite all this inner turmoil, one thing was certain. Whatever happened, they had no choice but to fight or die. Generations, Santa's Dark Secret Part 2. The Winters family spent the next few days preparing for the worst. They reinforced their home, sharpened their weapons, gathering as many supplies as possible. But nothing could have prepared them for what was to come. On the third night, just as the moon was rising above the trees, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything they had ever heard before. A loud crash sounded, then something slammed into the front door of their home. The family sprang into action, grabbing their weapons and taking up defensive positions around the room. Something was outside, pacing back and forth, waiting for its chance to strike. With a mighty roar, it came, bursting through the door, sending splinters flying in every direction. It was a massive beast with sharp claws and teeth the size of daggers. The Winters family fought valiantly, but they were no match for the creature's strength and ferocity. One by one, they fell, wounded and bleeding. Invincibility gleamed within its eyes, as it displayed a savage hunger that tore through them. Just when all hope seemed lost, the youngest member of the family, Zira, stepped forward. Seemingly too tiny to wield a sword, her green eyes burned with determination. With a cry of rage, she charged at the creature, using her sheer force of will as an accelerant to push her body further. The creature snarled, lunging at her with an equal ferocity. Zira dodged its massive claws with ease, jumping and rolling out of the way. She slashed at the fiend with her sword, the blade slicing him deep. The creature roared in pain, but it was too late. The girl had found its weak spot. With a final blow, she plunged her sword into the creature's heart. It let out a deafening screech before collapsing onto the ground, dead. Zira stood over the fallen creature, panting heavily. Her family looked on, stunned by what they had just witnessed. She had saved their lives with nothing but her courage and skill. But their troubles were far from over. They had no idea where the creature had come from, or if there were more like it out there, waiting to attack. Zira knew what they had to do. She would go out into the world and find out everything she could about these creatures, where they came from, how to defeat them, and how to protect herself and her family in the future. So she set out, determined to become a warrior like no other. She traveled far and wide, seeking out the most skilled fighters and learning everything she could from them. She trained day and night, pushing herself to her limits and beyond, and eventually she became a legend in her own right. People spoke of Zira in hushed tones, telling stories of her bravery and her prowess in battle. They called her the Creature Slayer, and her name struck fear into the hearts of any who dared to cross her path. But despite her fame and power, Zira never forgot where she came from. She returned to her family and shared with them all the knowledge she had gained about the creatures that had nearly destroyed them. Together, the family built a fortress to protect themselves from any future attacks. And with Zira's training and leadership, the Winters family became a mighty army, ready to face any danger that came their way. The Creature Slayer's name spread far and wide, reaching the ears of a powerful king who resided in a distant land. The king had heard rumors of Zira's incredible strength and feared that she could pose a threat to his kingdom. One day he summoned her to his palace and demanded that she pledge her allegiance to him. Zira, however, was not one to be intimidated. She refused the king's offer, knowing that it would mean giving up her freedom and her ability to help those in need. This act of defiance enraged the king, who ordered his soldiers to capture Zira and bring her to him by force. But she was not so easily defeated. Zira fought back with all her might, using every ounce of skill and technique she had learned to fend off the soldiers. After a strenuous battle, Zira emerged victorious, but she knew that the king would never stop trying to control her. So she made the difficult decision to leave her homeland and seek refuge in a place where no one knew her name. She journeyed for many days, traveling through treacherous terrain and facing countless hardships along the way. But despite all the obstacles, she never wavered in her determination to start a new life. Zira arrived at a small village nestled in the mountains. The villagers welcomed her with open arms, sensing that she was a woman of great strength and courage. And in time, she came to love the tiny community as her new home. Years passed, and the Creature Slayer grew older, surrounded by people who loved and respected her for who she was. She no longer needed to fight battles or prove herself to anyone. When she finally passed away, the villagers built a monument in her honor, a towering statue that stood at the center of their village. The statue depicted the Creature Slayer holding a sword, her expression that of a fierce determination. For generations to come, the people of the village told stories of Zira and her incredible feats of strength and bravery. Her legend lived on, inspiring others to stand up against tyranny and fight for what they believed in. But as time went on, the world around the village changed. Kingdoms rose and fell. Wars were fought and won, and the memory of the Creature Slayer began to fade. A young woman, Ellen, stumbled upon the village and saw the statue of the Creature Slayer. Intrigued, she asked the villagers who the statue depicted and was regaled with tales of the Creature Slayer's bravery and heroism. Ellen was inspired by the Creature Slayer's story and decided to follow in her footsteps. She trained tirelessly, honing her skills until she too became a masterful warrior. And so, the legacy of the Creature Slayer lived on, passed down from one generation to the next, inspiring countless others to fight for what they believed in. Ellen traveled far and wide, slaying creatures and monsters wherever she went. She was a force to be reckoned with, a symbol of hope and courage in a world that often seemed dark and dangerous. But as she grew older, Ellen felt a sense of weariness creeping up on her. She had been fighting for so long, and the battles never seemed to end. Despite all her victories, there were always more creatures to slay, more dangers to face. One day, while traveling through a dense forest, Ellen stumbled upon a small cottage nestled among the trees. It was a peaceful place, far removed from the chaos and violence of the world she had known for so long. Ellen decided to stay at the cottage for a while, to rest and reflect on all she had done and all she had yet to do. She found herself growing fond of the tranquility of the cottage and the simple life it offered. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. While recuperating, Ellen spent her time tending to the garden, reading books, and taking long walks through the forest. Content to live a quiet life far away from the troubles of the world, she no longer felt the need to slay creatures or fight battles. One day, while planting flowers, Ellen received a visitor. It was a young girl, no more than 10 years old, who had stumbled upon the cottage while wandering through the forest. The girl was scared and alone, having lost her family to a band of ruthless bandits. Without hesitation, Ellen took the girl in and cared for her. She listened as the girl recounted her harrowing tale of survival, And in that moment, the fire within the woman reignited. She realized that there were still battles worth fighting, still creatures worth slaying, and still people worth protecting. Ellen trained the young girl she later came to know as Ada in the ways of combat and survival. She taught Ada how to wield a sword and defend herself from danger. Together, they patrolled the forest surrounding the cottage, seeking out and defeating any threats to the innocent. More and more lost people, seeking refuge, found their way to the cottage. Ellen and Ada welcomed each of them, becoming a beacon of hope and safety in a world filled with darkness. A trickle of visitors soon became a tight-knit community of warriors, protectors, and survivors, all united in the fight against evil. Ellen had found a new purpose in life, one that was not just about fighting for herself, but for others as well. She had discovered that true strength came not only from physical prowess, but also from the bonds of love and compassion. And so Ellen lived out the rest of her days at the cottage, surrounded by those she had protected and inspired. And though she never forgot her past, she also never looked back. The life she'd found in the cottage was the life she was meant to live. As Ellen lay on her deathbed, surrounded by Ada and her loved ones, the woman felt no fear or regret. She had lived a life filled with adventure, love, and purpose. And she knew that her legacy would live on far past her last breath. Ada, now a grown woman, sat by Ellen's side holding her hand gently. She couldn't imagine life without the woman who had become a mother to her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered her final goodbye. Ellen smiled weakly, her eyes fluttering. For a moment, there was silence in the room, as everyone held their breaths, waiting for the inevitable. But then, something strange happened. A soft glow emanated from the woman's body, growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire room. Ada gasped, unsure of what was happening, but then she felt a warmth spread through her body, like a comforting embrace. And in that moment, she knew that Ellen had not truly left them. Her spirit would live on, guiding and protecting them from beyond the veil. For the cottage was not just a physical place, but a symbol of hope and resilience. It stood as a reminder to all who passed by that even in the darkest of times, there is always a light to be found. Ellen had been a fierce warrior and a light for so many. The community of warriors and survivors mourned Ellen's passing, but they also celebrated her life. They spoke of her bravery, her compassion, and her unwavering determination to make the world a better place. They shared stories of her adventures and the countless lives she had touched along the way. In the days following Ellen's passing, Ada found herself drawn to the cottage. She felt Ellen's presence there, and it gave her comfort. It was as if her mother warrior was still watching over her, guiding her in her own journey. As she walked through the cottage, Ada noticed a book on the shelf that she had never seen before. It was old and worn and secured with a leather string. Ada reached out and pulled it from the shelf, flipping through the pages. It was a journal, filled with Ellen's thoughts and reflections on her life. Ada felt as though she was getting to know Ellen all over again. But as Ada neared the end of the journal, the entries became darker, more intense. Ellen had been facing a danger far greater than anything they had ever encountered before. The elder warrior had been fighting a force that threatened to consume her very soul and take away everything she held dear. In the end, she had triumphed, but at a great cost. Ada felt a sense of dread wash over her as she realized the danger was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Determined, she knew she would carry on her warrior mother's legacy, to fight for what was right, and to never give up hope. As Ada closed the journal, the young woman saw a note scrawled on the back cover. It read, "You are the next warrior. Protect as I have protected." Ada felt a shiver run down her spine as she absorbed the weight of those words. Her mission was now clear, so Ada set out on a journey to continue Ellen's legacy. She learned everything she could about the danger the woman had faced, and she trained relentlessly to become a warrior like the woman before her. As time passed, Ada grew into a formidable force to be reckoned with. She traveled the world, fighting against the darkness that threatened to consume it, saving countless lives, bringing hope to those who had lost it. As she fought, Ada always felt Ellen's presence. Inspired by her warrior mother, She looked to her memory for guidance and the strength to fight each battle. One day, as the young woman stood on the precipice of yet another battle, she felt Ellen's presence stronger than ever before. In that moment, she sensed that her teacher was watching over her, protecting her even in death. Ada charged into battle, her sword held high. The air was thick with the stench of death. But even as she fought, Ada felt herself growing weaker, the life force draining from her body. She had been fighting for so long, battling against an enemy that never tired or weakened. As she staggered back from a particularly brutal blow, Ada felt a presence beside her. Turning, she saw the woman who had inspired her, standing tall and proud. "Ellen, you are not alone in this fight," her warrior mother whispered. "I have always been with you, guiding you and protecting you, and I always will be." A surge of strength pulsed through Ada's being, recharging her spirit, clearing the doubt in her mind. Standing straighter, she gripped her sword, preparing to face the evil once more. In that moment, Ada stood side by side with the woman who had mothered and protected her since she was young, their eyes fixed on the enemy before them. With a roar of defiance, the two charged forward as one. Metal clashed, the gnashing of steel punctuating the night as the battle raged on. As the sun rose over the battlefield, Ada emerged victorious. The darkness had been vanquished, and those she loved were safe once more. Exhausted but triumphant, Ada turned to the woman who had inspired her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ellen smiled. "You were always capable of doing it on your own, but I'm glad I could be here to support you." And with those words, the warrior mother faded into the mist, leaving Ada standing alone on the battlefield. She looked around at the destruction that surrounded her, taking in the carnage and devastation left behind by the darkness. Ada wiped the sweat from her brow, the weight of exhaustion settling over her. Choosing to not let her sadness consume her, she gathered her strength and made her way through the wreckage, searching for survivors. As she searched, the young woman reflected on all that she had learned during the battle. She discovered a strength within herself that she never knew existed, and a resilience that allowed her to continue fighting even when all seemed lost. But most of all, she'd found that even the strongest warriors need someone to lean on from time to time. For many weeks, Ada continued her search for survivors. She found many wounded, but few who had escaped the darkness unscathed. It was a difficult and heart-wrenching task, but the young warrior did not shy away from it. She tended to their wounds and gave them food and water, doing everything she could to help them heal. As she worked, Ada thought about her warrior mother, Ellen, wondering where she had come from and why she had chosen to help her in her time of need. One night, as she sat by the fire, nursing a bowl of soup, Ada heard a rustling in the bushes. She tensed, reaching for her sword, as a figure emerged from the underbrush. To her surprise, it was the apparition of her warrior mother. Ellen took a seat by the fire. "I've been watching you," she said, smiling at the young woman she'd taught everything she knew. "You have grown stronger and more resilient with each passing day. I am so proud of you." Ada's heart swelled with pride, but then she noticed an unsettling sadness in Ellen's eyes. "What is it?" Ellen groaned. "I have something of the utmost importance to tell you," the warrior mother said. "I am not from this world. I have been sent here by the gods to guide and protect you in your fight against the darkness. But now that our struggle is over, my destiny has been fulfilled. The time has come for me to return to my realm." An aching sorrow pierced Ada's heart. She couldn't imagine being without her teacher and confidant. "Can't you stay just a bit longer?" she pleaded. "There are still injured to tend to, and so much left undone." "Alas, it cannot be," Ellen replied. "But before I depart, take this as a token of my gratitude." With that, she pulled out a small crystal pendant from beneath her cloak and offered it to the young warrior. Its facets sparkled brightly in the moonlight. "Thank you," Ada breathed, cradling the precious gift in her hands. "I will keep it close to me always." Ellen helped Ada to stand. "It's time for me to go," she whispered, smiling at the young woman who had been like a daughter. "But never forget what I told you. You have within you a strength that surpasses any obstacle ahead of you, Embrace it always. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Thank you for watching.